I am now calling to order tonight's special joint meeting of the Council and the Planning Commission. Welcome, everyone. As we do with several large items, we bring both bodies together to discuss and listen and learn to various issues. Today, we are here to discuss the General Plan 2040. Just for those that are participating and those in attendance, what I intend to do, just as we do with our study sessions, we will open up for verbal communications. Afterwards, we will focus specifically on the general plan. I'll ask staff to provide their staff report. And then I've asked both GPAC Chair Hansen as well as Planning Commission Chair Janoff to provide their snapshot of where we started, where we are at now, and then the role of the Planning Commission as it moves forward, and ultimately staff will take over with the process as we continue the conversation. Today is an opportunity to ask questions, to hear from the public. It's not an opportunity to opine just yet. There will be plenty of opportunities to do so, but really it's to provide staff what other pieces of information you may need as this process continues moving forward. And so with that, Ms. DeLong, if you wouldn't mind calling roll.
Certainly. Thank you and good afternoon. I'll begin with the commissioners. Emily Thomas, Reza Tavana, Jeffrey Suzuki.
Present.
Melanie Henson.
Here.
Jeffrey Barnett.
Present.
Vice Chair Kendra Birch.
Present.
Chair Catherine Janoff.
Present.
Councilmember Risto.
Here.
Councilmember Hudis.
Here.
Councilmember Badami.
Here.
Vice Mayor Rennie.
Here.
Mayor and Chair Sayak.
I'm here as well. Thank you. And we do have a quorum, and so we'll officially begin at 4:03. As with all other meetings, we do have an opportunity for verbal communication. And so those in attendance, if you would like, oh boy, I'm sorry. If you would like to speak on an item that is not related to the general plan, please go ahead and raise your hand.
Mayor, because this is a special meeting, it would be on items only on the agenda.
Okay. Well, I see no hands raised, and so let's go ahead and let's move to our other business, which is our general plan.
Mayor, I apologize. I have one hand.
Okay. I see. Thank you. And it's Dashiel. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. Leads. Go ahead and speak. And again, this is for an item that is not specific to our general plan.
Okay, thank you. Hi, my name is Dashiell Leeds. I'm the conservation assistant for the Sierra Club Loma Prieta chapter. I'm giving sort of a preemptive comment in support of something you may hear later from Los Gatos plant-based advocates. They sent me a proposal for the town to take on programming to encourage plant-based diets. The Loma Prieta chapter has reviewed the proposal and we think it's a great idea. So I'd just like to comment in support of that. Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much. Okay. And I don't believe I see any other hands in our participants raised. So I'm going to close verbal communications. I'll bring it back. And so if we will begin our discussion on our general plan draft 2040. Because of the large number of panelists involved, if you would like to speak, I just ask that you use the raise hand feature since I am not able to keep everyone's little box on my screen. And with that, if we can have staff begin, and then again, and then I'll turn to GPAC Chair Hansen next.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor, council members, planning commissioners. My name is Jennifer Armour, interim planning manager, and I've been helping to guide this general plan update through its project, through the process. And I have a presentation for you this evening just to try and set the stage of the work that's gone into the process so far, and where we're going, what the next steps are, and what is in this draft 2040 general plan. So we're going to have a presentation. Thank you, Jenna. So we can go to the next slide. So the purpose of tonight's meeting, slide 2, thank you, is where are we and where are we going? We're going to talk through that, give an overview of the general plan, vision and guiding principles, and touch on some of the key changes in the different elements, the different chapters of the general plan, and then get to the discussion for this evening. Next slide. And next slide. So the draft general plan is draft 2040 general plan was prepared and recommended by the General Plan Update Advisory Committee. As you saw in your staff report, they had 35 meetings going through the process of looking through each of the elements here. Amazing work from the GPAC. Preparation of this draft plan also included extensive outreach, as was described in your written staff report. We now have a draft environmental impact report, the EIR, and has been through its public comment period. And we're meeting today to provide foundation for future discussions and consideration of the draft general plan. Next slide. And so where are we going? The upcoming meetings that are on the schedule, we have a community meeting for further discussion and sharing similar information that we're sharing tonight. That's scheduled for Wednesday evening, October 6th at 6 p.m. That'll be held via Zoom. Then we will go to Planning Commission for consideration of the draft 2040 general plan and the final EIR. So the final EIR will include response to the comments that we have received on the general or on the EIR. So there's a little bit of a differentiation between the comments received on the EIR, the environmental review, and those that were attached to your staff report this evening. The comments, public comments received with your staff report this evening include all of the written comments that we have received since the last GPAC meeting. And a lot of those more detailed comments will actually be part of the Planning Commission and then Town Council discussions as to whether there are further modifications that you request to make to this draft general plan before adoption. And in the end, we will be creating an online interactive general plan. We will take the PDFs that we have and create something that is going to be interactive, interconnected, and much more usable than just a large PDF document. Next slide. Thank you. So we are updating the general plan. This is required by state law for every jurisdiction to have a general plan, and it's meant to represent the community's vision for the future. Next slide. The initial direction that we received from council was that it was serving the community well, but as you can see here, there were actually a number of items that through the process, through the additional outreach to the community, it was discovered we needed to put a little more time into to try and make sure those were updated as well. Next slide. The next slide does show us some of the documents that have been prepared over the course of the project, additional information for background and through the consideration. Next slide. So then we have the vision and guiding principles, which is next slide. Thank you. So here's a vision statement. Also attached to the staff report that was provided you for this evening is a revised vision statement, some wording modifications that our GPAC members and planning commissioners can actually talk to, that because this vision statement and then the guiding principles that follow were developed at near the beginning of this process, there were some additional changes that were recommended by the GPAC at the end of the process. Next slide. And we can go through these ones pretty quickly. We've got the vision that was on the previous slide, and then we've got guiding principles that get a little more in depth, breaking it into community vitality, diverse neighborhoods, fiscal stability and responsibility. And then next slide. Government transparency, inclusivity, and mobility. Next slide. Promoting public safety, protecting natural resources, and sustainability. Next slide. So those are the overarching vision, guiding principles that then carry through to the 12 chapters of the general plan. We will probably speak a fair amount this evening about housing numbers, but this general plan has a lot of content and covers a lot of different topics. as you can see here. Next slide. I wanted to include this just to emphasize that this is a high-level document, and a lot of it is at the goal and policy level. There are implementation programs, but even those are at a high level. Next slide. So now I'd like to quickly go through some of the most significant changes that have been made. One of them being the creation of a new racial, social, and environmental justice element. So this is a new standalone element that the town has not had before and tries to provide support for the work of the town going forward. Next slide. Land use, I actually have several slides on this one, but of course, as a planner, we focus on this. And so there are a number of things that have changed here. One, of course, is that we are trying to provide enough room in this plan for the next housing element update RENA cycle. And we also have created a new community commercial zone, which was allowing for differentiation between different types of commercial areas in town. Next slide. We also incorporated the concept of missing middle housing, which we can go into more, but just wanted to mention it here. Let's move on to the next. This is an illustration of missing middle housing between the detached single family home and apartment or mixed use projects. Next slide. Other key changes, focus on neighborhood serving commercial and trying to support the design guidelines for the community place districts, which, next slide. Oh, before I get to community design and community place districts, I did want to step you through some of the housing numbers that have recently been discussed. This is also included in the staff report, but it shows you how the numbers evolved from the land use alternative C that was in the land use report through to the GPAC's preferred land use alternative, which became the preferred land use alternative framework that was approved by town council. Then with some modifications for implementation of that framework that then took us to what was brought in the form of a land use element to GPAC for their consideration. When the GPAC reviewed this draft land use element, they decided to also allow housing in the office professional and service commercial designations, which increased that housing number by another 313. And the final EIR, the number that has been discussed most, actually also includes existing and previously approved projects. So that is above and beyond what this general plan actually is proposing in terms of change. Next slide. So as I mentioned, we've got community design element, and this provides, we've tried to incorporate some more objective standards and community design for the new development that could be implemented under this general plan. Next slide. It enhanced use of graphics and other details that help this new or this revised element be helpful. Next. So then we've got the mobility element, a shift in this from the automobile emphasis that was in the existing general plan to focusing on reducing vehicle miles traveled and supporting bicycle and pedestrians throughout town. Next slide. Public facilities, services, and infrastructure, very important to our community. And so updating some of the policies supporting our youth and senior services and other healthy community elements. I believe we will have some speakers today interested in talking specifically about the plant-based eating parts of these. Next slide. Then we've got open space, parks, and recreation, some new policies there. Next slide. The environment and sustainability. We've updated the noise standards table here, as well as increasing some new goals and policies for sustainable site design, etc. Next slide. And hazards and safety, to make sure that we are in conformance with state regulations and prepared for future health emergencies and wildfire preparedness. This was also a very important element of extensive discussion. Next slide. And that's the end of the staff summary. Thank you for sticking with me for that. We are available to answer questions. Happy to answer questions that you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Armour. And as you've heard, there are several elements to our general plan. What I'd like to do when we do get into the details is take each element, see if there's any questions from our panelists before we move into some of the more robust discussion. I know we have received significant comment on our land use and community design, but as Ms. Armour said, there are several other elements to our general plan, and I want to make sure we give equal time and space to each of those elements as they are so intertwined with each other. Overall, I just, as Ms. Armour said, the goal is a forward-looking document that gives us a roadmap to how our town will begin to operate and plan for it over the next 20 years. There are some regional decisions that have been made for us as we move forward. And how do we take control so that we can proactively design and create a constitution, so to speak, that fits for our character and our town and all the different characteristics that make us unique. But before we get into the actual document, I do want to ask GPAC Chair Hansen, since you and the GPAC committee have been carrying the bulk of this work, I want to thank you, first of all, for all the effort that you and your committee members have put forward in this document. As Ms. Armour said, there have been changes from the initial discussion, and give you an opportunity to share your perspective as chair of that evolution during the time it has been residing with your committee.
Thank you very much, Mayor Sept. So I would like to actually thank everybody that's on the GPAC and start with that, actually the composition of the committee, because many members of the public may not realize what goes into this process, but the General Plan Advisory Committee is composed of all members of the General Plan Committee, which always includes 2 members of Town Council, 3 members from the Planning Commission, and then 4 members from the community that are appointed by the Town Council as well. And then in the case of the General Plan Update Advisory Committee, we also had 3 community members that interviewed with and were appointed by the Town Council. So we had a committee of 12. And when we started the process almost 3 years ago, we started with the guidance from the Town Council. They had some guiding principles and things for us to focus on. And then the first thing we did is work on the vision statement. And I won't go into all the steps because Ms. Armour explained all this, but I think the vision statement and the guiding principles were really important for us. And we actually came to a pretty easy consensus given the direction from Town Council and the people on the committee and some good discussions on that. And that kind of led into everything else that we wanted to do and needed to do with all of the different elements of the general plan. So with that said, some people did at the very end, after things evolved with the pandemic and Black Lives Matter and stuff, wanted to make some changes to the vision and guiding principles. But generally, the whole concept of it, and we spent at least a meeting or 2 on it, stood, and it was also approved by the Planning Commission and Town Council, as were the guiding principles. I wanted to say a word about the 2020 plan. When we started out, the assumption was the 2020 general plan was serving us well, which it has been. However, when we started going through the document and we realized the amount of additional residential housing that we would need to provide that would be required by the state, that some other things needed to change. And there was things in the general plan like, we want to make sure we keep all the auto dealers, which isn't going to be realistic. There was things about we should never allow, unless the residents are, are all in favor, any additional housing. And, these are choices that we don't get to make anymore. And so there's some language that we had to modify in the existing 2020 plan, as well as I think the mobility element is one that was mentioned. We spent probably 3 or 4 meetings on that, trying to make that more forward-looking and take it into the next 2 decades. And then I wanted to comment a little bit about we were working on this during the pandemic. We took a couple of months off at the beginning of the pandemic, but we ended up asking to have a community meeting with testimony on what issues might have been encountered that involved racism in Los Gatos. And that happened in July of 2020, and it made a big impact on everyone in the committee, because we did hear a lot of residents testify that they had issues with that. And the town has been doing a lot on that front, but it inspired the General Plan Advisory Committee to want to have an element that was dedicated just to those kinds of issues and the things that we thought we could address in the next 2 decades. And we did have overall 35 meetings. We probably spent the majority of it on land use and community design, because during that process, we did get our RENA numbers for the next cycle, which is almost 2,000 units. And we had started out with that as a number. And then we have to also remember that in this 20-year cycle, we have not only the upcoming housing element, but we'll have an additional housing element that starts at 2030, and then a third housing element that will start towards the end of the 20-year cycle. And then I think that was all I wanted to say, except that we had a great committee and a lot of discussions over 35 meetings. And we think we have a pretty good plan that we can take forward and hopefully get good input and make adjustments that we need.
Thank you, Chair Hansen. And Planning Commission Chair Janoff, would you like to add some comments?
Yeah, pretty much everything that Commissioner Hansen has said, absolutely everything is accurate. It was a long haul. There were a lot of robust discussions. This wasn't a slam dunk, although there was good consensus as we moved forward. So I think what you see before you in draft form really does represent a unified thinking on the part of the GPAC. And we heard from a great number of community members about a wide range of topics, as Commissioner Hansen said. And we took those into consideration and worked those into the general plan as much as possible. Having said that, one of the things the General Plan Advisory Committee struggled with, particularly at the beginning, was the notion that we needed to stay at a pretty high level. We kept wanting to do deep dives and put in specifics and details. And staff is really patient about reminding us that the nature of the general plan is a framework. It's a very high level document. It's not intended to specify detail. That's for the town's underlying policies and other framework of documents. That's where those details will be contained. We wanted to make sure, though, that the framework, the general framework, was consistent within itself and represented the general direction that the town wants to go in. So I just wanted to emphasize this is a very high level document, and we're looking forward to underpinning it with detailed policies and other necessary documents to make sure that its goals and policies are implemented.
Thank you, Chair Janoff. And as the virtual baton is being passed from GPAC to you now, and so we look forward to watching those commission hearings as well. Okay, so panelists, let's just do a deep dive into this. What I'd like to do, I'm just going to just follow and break out our discussion similar to the actual document. If there's any general questions that are more introductory in nature, that aren't specific to an element, I'll open the floor for anyone who would like to do that. Otherwise, I'd like to just take each element, open it up, see if there's any questions there, and then go through each one. Once we've answered those, I will open to the public. And then after the public, we'll have an opportunity again to bring it back if any of those comments produce more questions. So, okay. And so again, Chapter 1, the introduction, and if there's any overall questions that that anyone has at this point, so in terms of the process. Okay. Let me see. Councilmember Hughes?
Thank you. And I have some questions about process, but again, I wanted to thank the chair and the vice chair for the work that's come about. I know how difficult it is. And I know that the challenges with balancing different perspectives. And what I wanted to ask about was community engagement. And so this may be more for staff, I'm not sure, but do we know how many Los Gatos residents engaged with this process? Do we have a count of unique people, or what percentage of our residents have engaged so far?
And staff, as we get questions, I'm going to let you guys decide who takes the answer.
Ms. Arbor, I don't believe we have unique data other than the website. We might be able to extract some of that data, but we can definitely compile that prior to moving forward to Planning Commission and Councilmember Gatos.
And I can add that at this point, I need to open it up for a moment, but we do have 337 subscribers to notify me for the General Plan 2040, specifically for that topic. And so these are people who have requested to be added to that list or have participated in one of the early community meetings. In addition to that, staff has been going out to farmers market every 3 weeks since June of this year. And so the outreach that we found with that is 30 to 50 residents conversations, handing out documents. So, it's been a pretty good, robust outreach process.
I mean, I would urge us to continue, really trying to continue to engage, because I think the numbers are a small percentage probably of the population is really aware. I reached out to a large number of residents, and about 5,000 people looked at an email, read an email from me about the process. And so I think there probably are more people along the way who'd be willing to engage as it becomes more real. So the outreach efforts, I think, are very important, because at least as it's drafted now, this will fundamentally change the town in a lot of ways.
Any other questions on process? Yes, Councilmember Badami.
Thank you. Just a quick question. I don't see the consultants on as panelists, so are they available to also take questions tonight?
Thank you, Councilmember Baname. We have not included them in this meeting. They will be available when we get to the Planning Commission and Town Council meetings for consideration of the draft general plan and final EIR.
Thank you.
Councilmember Hughes.
Yeah, just one more thing relating to outreach. I've had a number of people say that they have difficulty with the complexity and length of the document. I know I've brought this up to staff for several months. Is there anything going on to produce sort of a mid-level document, not a 1 or 2 page, but something that has some substance and can highlight what has changed, the degree of impact, the neighborhoods that are changing, and things like that? I think that would help with engagement as well, if it's a little bit more approachable and not just a giant document in EIR.
Thank you, Councilmember. I'll give a start. And on the website and handing out at my table at the farmers market, we do have a newsletter that does try to do exactly that, summarizing what's proposed in this draft 2040 general plan in a more digestible form, and then allowing residents to go online to see the PDF of the full document if there are particular details that they are looking for. And we have an email address that staff is always available to answer questions if there is further clarification that we can provide.
Any other questions? Okay, so if we can, let's jump into the racial, social, and environmental justice element. It's chapter 2 of our general plan, and there are any questions to staff on this element. I see no hands raised. And so let's move on to our land use element, which I'm sure will generate several questions. This is chapter 3. Vice Mayor Rennie.
Thank you, Mayor. I wanted to ask about the missing middle definition on 3-5 of the general plan. It's kind of defined differently than I think about. Missing middle to me is usually been talked about in the context if you have income restricted affordable housing, and then you have luxury housing, and then sort of the average worker, what that we define as our police or our teacher or so forth, can't afford the luxury and they don't qualify for the affordable. So we usually call, that's the missing middle housing that's missing. But in our document, we've defined it just as duplexes and fourplexes, basically, when in fact, to me, missing middle could be something from the medium density or even the high density or the neighborhood commercial, community, all of these things that produce housing that's affordable in that middle range, to me, is missing middle housing. So I guess the question is, can't we expand our definition? So if we say we're looking to fill the missing middle need, can't we expand our definition beyond duplex and fourplex and townhouse, basically?
Thank you, Council Member. I would say that for that definition, since this is in the land use element, it is focused a little more on the land use and maybe a little bit on form. Whereas we will get into definitions of affordability in the housing element when we do go through that part, the next phase. Once we've finished with this, we move to updating the housing element as part of a separate process. But also these kinds of detailed changes are the types of things that can be considered when we take the document to Planning Commission for consideration and then Town Council. And I don't know if our Community Development Director has anything else to add.
I think that covers it. I think, Vice Mayor, there are kind of two separate conversations in my eyes. There is the price point conversation, which is what resonates with you. This is more, as Ms. Armour mentioned, kind of more building form oriented and product type. So, ultimately, some or any of these, just take the duplex, for instance, you may have either 2 renters in there, and because they're generally going to be smaller, then that rent might be more, what I've heard in the past, practically affordable, rather than renting a single family house. So it's really providing additional housing opportunities that, we have in town currently. We just haven't, our current regulations wouldn't allow for most, if not all of these, under their current form, absent obviously pending legislation, which changes every year. But I would just add that additional comment.
I just think I'm just worried a little bit that we're missing something, because I've seen presentations where, say, small apartment buildings also fall in missing middle, and I worry where the language is going to go later on by having it defined this narrowly here. I guess if in terms of form, anyway. I'll let somebody else ask a question. Let me think about it some more.
And if I could ask Town Manager Pravetti as well as Director Paulson, as we start to ask questions such as these that may, as the process unfolds, if there's an opportunity, sometimes we call it our parking lot, but like if we can couch catch these so that they can be answered either, if not today, but at a future meeting, so that they're not just kind of floating around somewhere in the air.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor, and good evening, everyone. Let me just take this opportunity to say that those are great observations, and I think as we continue this very public process and sift through all of the detailed comment letters, staff will likely have some additional recommendations for your consideration when we do get to the public hearing phase. So we'll be happy to add the missing middle definition to that list. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Hanson?
Yes, thank you. I wanted to ask a question about the recent legislation that came out last week, but I wanted to preface it with why I'm asking the question. So in the staff report, it talks about on page 6 of 9, the expected new housing that's going to come from different categories. So for example, low density residential is 84 units out of the total of almost 4,000 units. And so I noticed there's a lot of comments about people worrying about their neighborhoods changing, but over a 20-year period, 84 didn't seem like a lot. However, with SB 9 passing last week, what impact does that have? I understand our general plan has these density standards, but how will that accelerate the process of or change what we have outlined in the general plan? This is for staff.
Thank you, Commissioner Hanson. So I'm assuming you're referring to SB 9 is my assumption. So obviously, as folks have been hearing, that's the legislation that was signed into law by the governor. We are continue to work, and I know the town attorney will be meeting with his colleagues this week as well, having similar conversations. There's a couple things I would say is, one, it requires the town to allow duplexes with a non-discretionary process. So basically a building permit in single family zones. It also allows for the opportunity for what are termed urban lot splits, where you can split a lot into two separate lots that can be sold and could contain each up to 2 800 square foot units in the form of a duplex or otherwise. But there are a number of limiting factors, and we're still working through some of those. But for instance, it's not permitted, the urban lot split is not permitted in historic districts. It is not permitted in very high fire hazard areas. So that cuts out a pretty good chunk of town. Our very high fire hazard severity zone, for instance, comes down to Main Street. It's a lot more than just our hillside residentially zoned properties. So that's going to limit, and as you see in the general plan and in that table you referenced, we also worked with consultants because we had to create assumptions of how much of the existing land in those categories is going to get redeveloped, right? So they're kind of in two buckets: what's going to get redeveloped and what's going to be accounted for from a vacant land perspective. So I think that is potentially another program, and we are actually expecting some guidance from the state on, this might be another program that we utilize depending on the state's input to help fulfill this next housing element cycle. So again, we would be making assumptions on what that would look like, and then hopefully the state will provide some clear guidance. I know we're requesting clear guidance on a couple items, but I imagine that is going to be an additional one where they're not going to let us say, for instance, every lot or 50% of the lots in town are going to take advantage of either duplex and or the urban lot split. They're going to have much more stringent standards than that, but that could be an additional program that could be utilized in the housing element. Ultimately, bed density is not a factor from the state's law. So, you can have, if you read the language, you could have as little as a 1,200 square foot lot with a duplex on it. That's going to far exceed the densities that we're talking about in the general plan currently.
So my interpretation is, well, for A, it's a little bit too early to tell. B, that that there are provisions of SB 9 that we already know that wouldn't necessarily apply to historic districts or the hillsides. So it's too early to tell. But I also heard there was a possibility that our assumption of 5% redevelopment rate might increase because of some of these state laws. Is that last part?
And again, that's possible. So again, you put it in this separate program bucket, and I don't want to get too far derailed into kind of the housing element discussion. But if you think about it, we've got the general plan, which is the 30,000 foot level. It's got a bunch of elements that go a little lower, and then we ultimately create a housing element that has a lot more defined components than the general plan. The other elements typically do, just because of state requirements. And so we're going to have to look at a number of things, but from a numbers perspective, it's the sites inventory process where we have to designate specific sites in the housing element, and that will be largely linked with a bunch of programs. So that could be the missing middle housing, that could be the ADUs, that could be potentially these SB 9 opportunities. And so then we have to work with the consultants and then develop those assumptions and then get that ultimately to the state. And then the state responds and says, yes, we agree with this. No, we don't agree with that. We think this is too high. This is too low. And so those are things that really are going to be much more laid out in depth in the housing element process.
Thank you for that.
Thank you. Councilmember Badami.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Rennie made some great comments about missing middle housing, which I also had some concerns over. So what does it mean? I think we need to define it further. And there is some debate over whether or not it truly is affordable housing. And if we're planning a 2040 general plan, if what may be missing now, is it going to be missing in 15 years? And I'd also like to know if other jurisdictions have used this concept in their general plans, because it's kind of a trendy term.
Thank you, Councilmember. I think we can definitely look into options for potentially adding to that definition.
Thank you. Councilmember Hudis.
Thanks. In kind of building off the question from Commissioner Hansen on SB 9, I think that as we move forward, it'll be really valuable to understand its impact on all of our plans now that it is signed into law, because the other aspect of it is that I wanted to understand a little bit more, and this may be more for staff. How did we move from the preferred alternative that was approved by the council, and it was certainly part of the planning commission when I was on the planning commission, when I look at the numbers that are in all of this, and I tend to go right to crunching numbers, but it looks to me like it's a 39% increase over the preferred alternative and a 96% excess or increase over the RENA requirement. So, roughly 3,900 units compared to a RENA requirement of 1,993. And so, and I do remember very well that the considerations of choosing between alternative B and alternative C, a lot of the discussion revolved around what are the RENAs going to be numbers be, and how are we going to meet the RENA numbers. And so I'm just interested in how we evolved so far beyond that, and why it didn't go back to the council when it took this departure to basically double the RENA numbers and to go 40% over the preferred alternative. I mean, there were 14 months that passed between the council weighing in and us now seeing a document that is that much larger. And the concern, of course, is that many of the things that former Mayor Joanne Benjamin raised about the impact on the character of the town and the neighborhoods and the values of that folks assumed would stay with the properties that they purchased. So the departure like that, how did that kind of go past the council participating in that?
Thank you, council member. If it's okay, I'd like to bring up one of the slides from the staff presentation that has the bulleted list from the staff report. It's slide 23. Because this does, you know, I touched on it, but this allows us an opportunity. Previous one, please. Oops. Let's go one more. You're on 18 now. We want to get to 23, please.
And my apologies, but I don't see the numbers, so just
okay,
keep telling me to.
So next one. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. You'll have one with a series of bulleted lists with numbers. Next slide. Two more. There we go. Thank you. All right, so this gives us an opportunity just to take the steps through this a little more slowly. You can see that we started with land use alternative C, and that was 2,303 housing units. And this did include an estimate over 20 years of 500 accessory dwelling units. And this was the point where we were still talking about opportunity areas. So then with discussing the different land use alternatives in the alternatives report with the GPAC developed their preferred land use alternative, which basically took alternative C, included the accessory dwelling units, and added downtown as an additional opportunity area for additional housing units in the downtown zone. That got us to the 2,464 housing units you can see here, which was what was approved by town council and adopted as the preferred land use alternative framework. As was discussed extensively at that time, it really was seen as a framework. The details of exactly how it would be implemented would be developed as we went through the land use element update part of the process. And so through the discussion with GPAC, it became clear that the idea of an overlay zone or some other way of implementing these opportunity areas was going to become too complex and difficult to understand. And since most of our commercial zones are within those opportunity areas, we were able to work with the consultants to translate this preferred land use alternative framework into what was proposed at the land use element with the 2,950 housing units. So this was an increase of approximately 500 units over the entirety of the town. Most of that is within the mixed use development and had to do with the assumptions made on what the development density would be for those properties that are redeveloped. Through the GPAC conversation of the land use element at the end of last year, there was a decision, and early this year, that the office, professional, and service commercial zones should be allowed to do mixed use developments as well. And so that added an additional 313. And the final number that is often talked about, this 3,738 housing units, that actually also includes 475 units that are the existing and previously approved projects. And that's what the environmental impact report has to review. So this kind of gives you the thinking and the process of how we got to these higher numbers. We can turn off the slide, I think. The one other piece that I would like to add in terms of understanding why these numbers are higher than the 1,996 or 93 that is our regional housing allocation, is that we start with that number, and there are a number of recommendations, including a recommendation for a 20 to 30% buffer above that for when we do get into the housing element discussion. And in addition to that, there needs to be room built in once we get to the housing element in case some of our assumptions are not accepted by the state as they do their review. But since we haven't gotten into that process yet, maybe ask whether Community Development Director Joel Paulson has anything further to add.
Thank you, Ms. Armour. The other thing I will add is the 500 accessory dwelling units that are contemplated in the general plan, our assumption is approximately, it was 25 per year. So for the first cycle, that would be 200. So 300 of those would come off that number for the first cycle as well. There are most of the Southern California jurisdictions are on a slightly different cycle than us. So we're learning things, every couple weeks, frankly, about some of the requirements. And it's a little more in some cases than recommendations, but actual requirements of the State Housing and Community Development Department as those jurisdictions are going through their housing element cycles. So there's a lot of factors. And like I said, I don't want to get too far out in the weeds. We're going to have a complete process on the housing elements. But ultimately, state law continues to change. They continue to restrict local control, and they continue to want us to ultimately provide additional housing. This is a large number. I don't think anyone who disagrees with that. So in this process, it became an issue where, a couple things. As the general plan, it kind of sets the bar for what our other zoning code and policy documents will ultimately be able to bear from a housing production standpoint. I think the GPAC and some of the members might remember this. There was also a pretty robust discussion about, ultimately providing additional housing type opportunities that haven't been traditionally seen in town, at least recently, given our requirements. So, this missing middle concept really is a form or housing type conversation, which would get to some of the practical affordability, but not the uppercase affordability, which is your moderate, low, very low, and extremely low. So I think it's really trying to provide an opportunity while still understanding that we're going to be able to create objective standards. We're going through that process currently. We've just begun, as well as the zoning code having additional objective standards. So for instance, and obviously the Planning Commission, public, and council are ultimately going to have this discussion. After a general plan is adopted, we're going to have to bring forward a number of zoning code amendments. And so, for instance, you could have, and we have this in town currently, still maintaining the form from a setback, height, FAR perspective, but that what otherwise looks like a single family house maybe has 3 apartments in it. So it's still maintaining that character and form, but it does come with potential impacts as well. I'm not going to skirt around that. That's for sure. It isn't a single family house. It just has that appearance, but provides opportunities that aren't currently being built in town very often. And again, absent the ADUs, you see some of that as well. But we really had to come up with a set of general plan requirements, regulations, so that we can ultimately go through not only this housing element cycle that was mentioned, but potentially a further one. There is also I can't remember if it's a policy or implementation program that basically we're going to revisit the general plan every 10 years. We may find that we have to revisit sooner than 10 years because there may be some other regulation that comes in from the state. But ultimately, it's trying to provide additional opportunities for housing types that we don't traditionally see currently.
Vice Mayor?
Thank you, Mayor. I kind of had three things. First, just to close the loop on the missing middle, I looked up on Wikipedia and they defined it as multi-unit housing that's compatible in scale with single family neighborhoods and transitional neighborhoods. And I would question that our definition in the book covers everything that fits that category. So my next question is a little more complicated. We used to have, so we currently have low density residential. We have it as a 0 to 5 density range. And the proposal in the general plan is a 1 to 12. And again, going back to SB 9 and trying to think this through, it sounds like we could have, and maybe that's the question, a low density residential that keeps the 0 to 5 for our historic neighborhoods and high fire neighborhoods if we wanted. That seems to be a change from what's in the proposal. And then we would have, I don't know, we'd have to call it another name, right? Another something that's not yet medium density, but meets this requirement of SB 9. And the second part of the question, so can we do that? Should we be doing that so that we have a differentiation? And if we did that, what would the density look like? Are you able to figure out now what the density would be for an SB 9 type of property? There must be some limit to how much you can keep dividing a property, right, down to something, and divide that into the number of acres, and then I guess the duplex is allowed on that. So is that 12 units as we had been proposing in this current draft plan, or is it a different number?
Thank you, Vice Mayor. I'll start by saying that I think part of that actually is already part of the plan in terms of our hillside residential is not getting any more dense. It's staying at the 0 to 1 per acre. And so then it is the single family, which, while not completely out of the high fire danger zone, that is proposed to be increasing. I also know that our community development director has looked some at the numbers of dwelling units that would be allowed on standard lot. And my instinct is to say that the SB 9 regulations actually would bring us kind of closer to the numbers that are proposed in this draft general plan, but he may have some additional thoughts on that.
But I'd say also to the Vice Mayor's question, no, we can't just run those numbers right now. That's something we can look into as it moves forward through the process and see where that gets us, because there's other provisions that even outside of those restricted areas that folks either aren't going to be interested in that type of living situation, and or they're going to have some other factor, which is part of SB 9, which could be, there's a demolition provision in there as well that would further restrict the opportunities. And to do that on a parcel by parcel basis is not something that staff is going to be able to do quickly or at all, because there are so many different factors that come into play. We can make some assumptions. They would be similar assumptions to what we have in the current general plan. What I would say is that low density residential in your separate category scenario, some of that will be in that low density category. And so we ultimately will be reducing the numbers as proposed here, and then making another assumption in the very high fire hazard area zones and the historic districts, which is going to continue to reduce that number. I think you correctly stated that it's a very complex question. And so, it's not a kind of plug and play where we can mess with one parameter, pull one lever and it gets us a different outcome. That's that specific. That is something though that we can look into and see if we can get some data for future meetings on that topic.
And so follow up on that, does high fire equal hillside in all cases?
Hillside, yes. So all of our hillside is in that severity zone, but it also comes down the hill all the way to Main Street which encompasses some low density residential. It goes over around towards downtown, coming towards some of the historic districts off of Main Street. And so some of those have either low or medium density designations. And so again, you would be pulling those numbers out and looking. I think what you're looking for is, can we reduce, for instance, the low density residential density that's proposed and try to account for the SB9 in the limited pie left where SB9 is allowed, which, again, we'd have to make an assumption, which probably would be similar to the low density residential. That's just a smaller pie, which might get us some numbers to backfill to make that initial number whole or some other number. So I'm assuming, and so you can please correct me if I'm wrong, but that's what my assumption is from your question.
Yeah, that's the gist of the question. If I could ask a third question, which I actually don't think you can ask now, but I would like to get sort of an answer to it over time. And what I want to understand is how much of the density we're placing is being placed near service-rich areas, so that at best we're reducing our impact on infrastructure. And so to me, that means, close to school, close to commercial where people can take trips not in a car, or it's next to the highway, so it's not very far, not much street distance before they get out of Los Gatos and on a highway on the way to work, kind of thing. And I don't really see that analysis here. I know we talked about that kind of when we're talking about the framing, so through our list of when we're putting it in office professional and service commercial and light industrial, and how much of that is really being placed in a service rich area that's going to reduce impact on infrastructure.
I think you're correct. Thank you, Vice Mayor, that we don't have that analysis, but I would point you to the table on page 6 of 9 from your staff report, and that does provide you with some housing numbers, though there is one correction, the number of housing units on vacant land in the hillsides. There's a typo there. It should be 160 or 116, not 166, but all of the other numbers for each zone should be correct to show you how many new dwelling units and where they're concentrated. And you'll see that it is the highest number is in our mixed use zone, which is where it would be located near a lot of those services along Los Gatos Boulevard.
Okay, thank you, Mayor.
Commissioner Hanson?
Thank you. I have a question. I was going back to Councilmember Gatos' comment about how did the number move. And so what I recall is that we didn't actually review any overall numbers related to housing at any stage after the preferred land use was approved by the town council. So I kind of had the same question, which was when we discussed having, for example, office mixed use with office and service commercial, my recollection of the GPAC is that we were doing that to give other choices for being able to add the housing, not to add actual units. So I myself was a bit surprised to see that. And so I was just wondering, is there, and then the other part where the number changed from when it got approved to when the framework was implemented. I know it's another almost 500 units. Is there a way to, if we wanted to bring the number down, to recast, say, for example, the 300 units from office as we thought it was to be as a choice without messing with all of the density standards that we put?
Thank you. I think that is a question that we will probably need to take back to the consultant to get a better sense of how flexible we can be in terms of the environmental review and how to work that as a consideration. I also see Joe Paulson has his mic unmuted. He might have something more to add.
Okay.
Thank you. Yes, we definitely would need to, well, to start with, I think, can the numbers be moved? That ultimately is going to be a planning commission recommendation and town council decision. We will definitely make sure that as we move forward through that process, we can understand the implications from both the general plan and the general plan EIR perspective, because that will be important as well. And so we can take a look at that and see if there is interest, which clearly we've heard from the public and heard from commissioners and council members this evening, to look for opportunities to maybe massage those numbers a little bit more. We can definitely take a look at that, and then I believe Ms. Bravetti might have some additional input.
Thank you. I just wanted to add that the GPAC did a great job in terms of identifying where those choices might be, but we do, under state law, have to analyze all of those choices cumulatively. And so that's why, you do see the numbers there. Ultimately, as we enter the public hearing phase, the Planning Commission and ultimately the council will be able to determine where exactly you want new development to occur. And so some of those choices may need to be modified or perhaps removed from the plan. But we've done environmental analysis on those choices. What developers typically look for is certainty and making sure that our policy documents are clear. So if there is ultimately a place that you really would like not to see mixed use, that can be part of your recommendation when the item comes before you in public hearing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Mayor, can I ask just a quick follow-up question? Okay? So the comment that Director Paulson made, and that I've heard this before in talking with him in planning meetings and whatnot, but the HCD buffer that was not a factor back in 2015, or at least not that I know of, that we now have to factor that in. Is that the time now to factor that in, or is that more with the housing element, or are we going to be putting ourselves in a bad place if we close out the general plan and don't have enough capacity in the plan to do that buffer?
So thank you for the question. Ultimately, we won't know a lot of that until we go through the housing element process and then ultimately get to the state. Because like I said, they may not agree with some of our assumptions. And so what would happen, I'll just play out worst case scenario, and worst case is probably not the appropriate term, but we go through, we have a general plan adopted, we prepare the housing element based on that general plan and the numbers in there. We send it to the state. They start whittling away saying, no, this percentage is too high. This expected density is too high. And they start whittling away at those numbers. And if we don't have other program opportunities or other sites that we can point to, because the site selection process, for those of you who went through it during the last housing element cycle, was very challenging. So you can only imagine how much more challenging it is going to be this cycle, especially given some of the new regulations that make it even more difficult to reutilize a site. But all that said, if we get to a point through the housing element process where we no longer have enough numbers for this, even just this next cycle in the housing element, then we would have to commit to doing additional general plan amendments to fill that gap and hope that HCD would allow us to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Gatos.
Thank you. And it's helpful to understand, Commissioner Janoff, Commissioner Hanson, what the process was, and from staff in terms of understanding how the numbers were built up. But my question was more about the process, and I think I asked it, is, why didn't this come back to the council? As Commissioner Hanson pointed out, more options were added, but that doesn't mean that we couldn't have taken away some densities elsewhere as we discovered new housing types that might be more attractive. So it concerns me of course, that we're virtually double the RENA requirement. And so again, I would ask, how did, number one, why didn't it come back to the council? And number two, for Mr. Paulson, I know you pointed out that HCD requires or is asking for a buffer of 20 to 30%. We're at 100%. Are there other communities at all that are submitting plans that are double the RENA allocation? My understanding is that 27 communities in the Bay Area have appealed their RENA allocation. And for some reason, Los Gatos has not, and the council hasn't even discussed that opportunity, which is now passed. But, the question is why 100% and why didn't it come back to the council?
Let me start if I may, and then the other team members might wish to join in. Let me just say that the GPAC was working really vigorously during COVID, during the end of 2020, working really diligently on all of the elements of the general plan. And we spent many meetings going through the land use element, talking through the policies and action items. We then, as we were wrapping up the general plan with the GPAC, we did more work. We had a draft document that disclosed the 3,700 units. So it did at that point become daylighted. We did not go back to the council because we were so close to finishing the GPAC work. It was my judgment that council knew where we were heading in terms of the preferred alternative. This is a draft plan and it's still going through its process. So the opportunity for change was still there. And so we did not bring it back to council because we knew we would be heading towards doing the EIR and being able to answer some of the other questions that we knew our community would have around infrastructure and environmental impacts. So because we had the housing element looming and those deadlines are very strict in state law, we felt it was really the best use of all of our time to wrap up a draft general plan so that the public could have an opportunity to see it in its entirety, how all of the policies would work together. And then we would be doing, just as we're doing now, having thoughtful discussion about potential changes and modifications. The appeal did not happen because we've been talking about 2,000 housing units for years for this general plan. So that number for RENA, we were never afraid of it. The town council had always acknowledged that we needed to be able to plan for about 2,000 units. And sure enough, that is exactly what our RENA ended up being. Ms. Armour did a nice job doing the crosswalk of how we got from the preferred alternative to where we are now. And again, we're in a dynamic process. This plan is still subject to change, and the Planning Commission and Council can make recommended changes, and ultimately Council will consider the plan. But it is important that we have a guidepost and a framework for the housing element, because those deadlines are very real. And if we don't have a certified housing element, we will not be eligible for state infrastructure money, which is pretty important to us in terms of being able to maintain our community. We can talk more about the appeal and other elements, Mayor, if you wish, but I just wanted to put that out there. Thank you.
There was one question that I asked that didn't get answered. That was, are there other communities that are submitting general plans and housing elements that are double the RENA allocation? My understanding, is that Monte Sereno, Los Altos, Palo Alto, Saratoga, Santa Clara, Los Altos Hills have all been trying to reduce their allocation because they're facing similar constraints. And the reason I bring this up is that if we provide capacity in our general plan and our housing element that is way beyond the RENA allocation, what happens is we lose control over where that development goes when someone comes in with a by right development. In other words, if it meets the criteria and we've said that they can do that and we've put those numbers in there, we can no longer shape and say that we think it would be better on the boulevard as a replacement than somewhere else that's in that plan. We're giving the full opportunities there. So again, the question is, do we know of other communities that are exceeding their RENA allocations to that degree?
Joel, before you step in and answer that, I wanted to provide a little bit of additional information. I don't know about other communities, but I did want to remind Council and Planning Commission that this is a 20-year plan. The RENA allocation is for the housing element, which is just the first 8 years of that. And so that is also a factor when we talk about the 20 and 30% buffer and giving enough room within the general plans. The housing element has a chance to find appropriate sites and programs to meet that. But in addition to that, it is intended to be a vision for 2040, which looks out 20 years, not just 8. In addition to that, I did want to share with this discussion that at the end of 2020, as we brought the draft land use element and community design elements to the GPAC, showing how it implemented the preferred land use alternative, we did actually schedule a meeting with town council to do an initial review of those 2 elements as well. And so on November 17th, the town council did get an initial look and have some discussion of those elements before the GPAC then got back into their discussion of how those elements implemented the preferred land use alternative on November 19th.
Okay. Commissioner Suzuki, I'm sorry, Ms. Armour, did you have anything else?
I didn't know whether the town manager or community development director had anything to add in terms of other communities.
So I unfortunately can't keep up with other communities' general plans. What I'll say is I think I received an email talking about another jurisdiction in the Bay Area. And what's happening is sometimes because their existing general plans won't accommodate the new RENA, they will go in and strategically just update, for instance, the land use element. So I know there are some jurisdictions that are doing that. And frankly, this one just happens to line up where we're looking out more than 2 cycles. We know our numbers for this cycle. We don't know what 2031 is going to hold for us. We'll probably know that in 2029, and we may be having additional conversations along these lines. So I unfortunately do not have any objective information on that, Commissioner or Council Member Hughes.
Commissioner Suzuki.
Thank you. I see a lot in the general plan emphasis on smaller units of affordability, so on and so forth. And I was wondering, to verify my understanding, in the housing element, there will be more specific guidelines on ensuring the affordability of whatever units we develop. I ask because it would be kind of a shame if we developed a plot of land and it would be the most convenient option available, which is usually luxury condos or apartments and so on and so forth.
So what I would offer is the town has an inclusionary housing requirement. So if you're building more than 5 units, then you have to comply with that and provide some, again, capital A affordable units. So those would be deed restricted units. And we deed restrict our affordable housing in perpetuity. The disconnect is that in the housing element, we are going to have to specifically define how many units this site, for instance, is going to produce, how many are going to be market rate, how many are going to be in moderate, low, and very low. The state hasn't provided us the tools where we can compel developers to have to build exactly what we said in the housing element. And so what typically happens is we get moderate and low units as part of our inclusionary housing process, but we never get those very lows, and they're very rarely ever at the numbers that actually can be produced from our assumptions. And so that gets to be the challenge. That would be a nice tool for the state to provide to local jurisdictions, because again, it's a planning effort. The housing element's a planning effort. And so, but we do have to, find some specific sites. I think ours is going to be far more heavy on the program side, but we haven't gotten far enough into it to even start having that conversation. But so the housing element will have specificity, but we're not going to be able to compel developers to meet that exact specificity.
Councilmember Badami.
Thank you. We received letters from former Mayor Joanne Benjamin and also the Los Gatos Community Alliance, and they had similar concerns that exceeding the RHNA numbers beyond the minimum, it strains the town with existing problems that are only going to get worse. So I have two questions. And do we have water, electricity, sewage treatment and capacity, enhanced law enforcement and public safety to accommodate increased numbers, or even their current RHNA allocation, even if we lower the numbers? And secondly, could the town and ultimately the Finance Commission prepare and review a fiscal analysis report to estimate the fiscal impacts of the build out?
Thank you, council member. I'll give a try at the first question that you had. And for that, when looking at whether there is the capacity for water and sewer, et cetera, other services, that is exactly why we have prepared a draft environmental impact report. The draft EIR is required by state law to look at those types of details. Potential environmental impacts include ensuring that the service providers do have the required contracts to be able to provide the required water, and there are ways of looking to confirm those details, and so that is part of the environmental review. In addition to that, the letter that you referenced from the Los Gatos Community Alliance was one of the comments that we received on the draft EIR, and so there will be a response to all of those comments received on the EIR as part of the final EIR. And so that will be additional information that will be provided to Planning Commission and Town Council and for the community in consideration when this does move forward to the public hearing portion of the process.
And if I may, just to add that fiscal impacts are not required for environmental impact reporting. And we are not planning to do a fiscal impact study. There was interest on the part of the Finance Commission to consider not only the general plan, but North 40 and other future developments in terms of its fiscal impact. They have a lot of work on their plate, so I'm not sure how that will be accommodated within their existing scope per the voter approved ordinance. But we understand that there is interest in the fiscal sustainability of the town. And that's why really with our budget, those are the decisions that get made annually to make sure that we do have the services and infrastructure in place. We have impact fees and other mechanisms to make sure that development pays their fair share. So we already have some mechanisms in place, and council using Prop 218 and other mechanisms could also look at other revenue generating needs over the life of this general plan to make sure that services and infrastructure keep a pace of the general plan.
Thank you for that. I don't have the EIR handy within arm's reach, but can you confirm that public safety is included in the EIR?
Public safety would be one of the services that would be analyzed, that is analyzed in the EIR.
Thank you. I did read it, by the way.
Councilmember Hughes.
Thanks. I just in response to the point about this is a 20-year cycle and the housing numbers are 8 years, I definitely understand that, but I guess two questions related to that. One is, do we know or think that there's any analysis that says the numbers are going to go up when the population of California is going down for the first time in many, many years? And do we have any knowledge of that? And is there anything that would prevent us from, I think actually Director Paulson said we could revise our numbers if we had a change in the housing element, in the housing requirements, either up or down. So is there any reason why we would want to put in excess numbers over a 20-year if we have no idea whether they're going to go up or down?
I would start by, thank you for that question, for the follow-up question. I would start by saying that, we did work with the consultants to look at this as a 20-year plan to try and make projections looking towards the future. But to confirm, as Joel Paulson stated, that we do have policy and implementation measure that has us taking a look at the general plan, evaluating it, and potentially doing some updates after 10 years.
The other thing that I brought up actually on the Planning Commission in February of 2020 was that we're in a time of high uncertainty now with our economy, with people's ability to afford housing. And by extending the timeline for the plan from the 10-year to the 20-year, we've opened ourselves to more risk over that time period that we don't get it right. And so it would seem to me that this is not the time to be building in larger numbers if there's not a need to. And then with regard to the affordability, I share Commissioner Suzuki's desire and drive to get more affordable housing. Unfortunately, when we go above the RHNA requirements, we enter into an area where developers will pick off the less affordable areas and will actually end up with an even smaller number. Remember, when we did the North 40, there was an affordability requirement. The reality is we got 49 affordable units and 320 out of 320, or about 15%. I don't know, the laws have somewhat changed, but that's our actual experience with how much affordable we get when we open up housing. So, and I applaud the different types that we've introduced in here, but I also think that by going to very large numbers, we open ourselves up to much more of the situation where large luxury dense housing is built, housing that would never have been approved in the kind of zoning and neighborhoods that we have in town.
Okay, Commissioner Jenoff.
Just a quick question regarding the California decline in California population. Is that true for the Bay Area or specifically Santa Clara County, or is that a statewide trend? Does staff happen to know?
I'm not sure where Councilman Member Hudis was pulling that number, but I'm assuming he found that information online.
It's actually from the census, and I also asked that question at the Association of Bay Area Governments meeting about whether they've factored that in. They acknowledged that there is a decline in population, but that has not yet been factored in to their understanding of the HCD and the RHNA. I hope that clarifies.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Paulson, if perhaps that could be added to our parking lot. I know that there's also the 2050 plan that ABAG is working on that looks at a lot of these numbers and forecasting. And if that could be brought into a future meeting as well, that'd be great. Okay, are there, and again, this is an opportunity for questions. And so I want to make sure that we also have room and time for our public. So are there any further on land use before I go to community design? Okay, and Councilmember Hudas.
Sorry, I had just one other one, and that is it possible to introduce some time fences or time periods for these numbers in housing? Because it strikes me that even at the 1,993, that's a large number. We wouldn't want it to come in front loaded and have it be developed by right in the first few years of our general plan when our infrastructure, water, other things are unable to keep up. So is it possible to, in our general plan, to put some timeframes for development, maybe break it into quarters or something like that?
That's certainly possible. San Jose did that in its general plan, where they essentially had different phases, and each phase had a certain allotment of housing and jobs that could occur. And then there were very specific parameters in terms of when the city could move to the next phase. That would require additional work and analysis. So it's certainly a possibility. It is a strategy for communities to consider. We are a much smaller town, and so I think we would need to give careful thought as to how that might unroll and what is actually viable in terms of implementation. So, but that type of work would need to be directed by the entire town council, because that's a significant modification to the plan as is.
Of course, but the concern is that our as a small town, our ability to control some of the infrastructure is even more limited, than a larger one, and it's one way to help make sure that the impact of very large increased housing numbers, even at the 1993 level, we're able to accommodate them. So it seems I'm glad to know that there's a way. It sounds like it costs money and it makes it more difficult.
Okay. If we could move on to our community design element, which is chapter 4. I'll look to our panelists, our commissioners and council members if there's any questions on community design. Seeing none, mobility, which is our chapter 5. Public facility services and infrastructure. Open space, parks and recreation. Hazards and safety. Oh, I'm sorry. Commissioner Hanson.
Didn't want to derail all the progress we're making. I had a general question because we're going through this. There was a bunch of comments that the GPAC made at our last meeting that weren't able to be incorporated because we had already started on the EIR process. So I just wanted to say, if people had questions or comments, like especially ones that came in, there was a lot of public comments. At what point will we be addressing those? Will it be when it comes to the Planning Commission or?
Yes, thank you for that question. There were some of the comments that were part of the motion from the GPAC that were actually incorporated. The difference between the preliminary draft general plan that you saw at the final meeting of the GPAC in May and the draft general plan that was published online in June. But if there are additional changes that are requested by the public or proposed by Planning Commission or Town Council members, those would be initially discussed at the Planning Commission meeting and would be part of a motion on your recommendation for the draft general plan plus any changes that then would be discussed by Town Council. And our current schedule has Town Council taking the recommendation from Planning Commission, considering it along with any additional public comments, making a motion that the staff and the consultants will work together to implement, so that we then bring to you a final general plan that includes implementation of any of those additional policies or modifications for the final adoption and certification of the EIR.
All right, thank you. And I apologize, Mayor. I just it made me think of that question because all these comments have been coming through. So.
Oh, absolutely. No, and this is the time to do that because I know there's a lot of process questions as well as content. Commissioner Suzuki?
Yeah, sorry. When you said mobility element, I couldn't ask my question in time. But my question is, when it comes to supporting VTA's Visona light rail extension, there's the language if when. I was wondering if you could clarify what exactly that means. So there's like shall and whatever, and then there's if when. Yeah.
Thank you. I'll start by saying that that is based on uncertainty as to whether that light rail will move forward, but I believe Joel Paulson might have something further to add.
That's correct. And the other is that we don't control VTA's actions. So, that's why you might have noticed a language change. I don't remember exactly what that discussion was when we went through GPAC, but we can take a look at it and see if there's an opportunity for different language.
And Vice Mayor, as a representative for Los Gatos on VTA, and as a board member, is there anything you want to add with regard to that?
I absolutely do. I was debating that this wasn't a discussion, it was a question and answer, but so.
And again, it's just to answer, like.
Yeah, the big problem with the Visona light rail is we don't have enough density to economically justify bringing it there. They need to project a minimum ridership in order to build it there. If we started planning a lot of density in that area, and actually, even if we had a plan, that might help. Campbell had a Dell area plan that they were working on that they then scrapped, right? And that really made it difficult to get to an economically viable ridership level. So it's a chicken and egg thing, right? If we had it, we would build more density, but they probably aren't going to build it until we build more density.
Thank you. I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but.
No, happy to be.
Any further questions? I know we skipped through mobility, but again, chapter 6, 7, 8, 9. I'm fielding any questions on that before we go to public comment. Seeing none, I am going to now. Oh, hold on, Councilmember Hughes.
My comment really is that I've read them in detail, and I think there's a lot of really terrific work in there, and it is work that is cohesive, and so the various elements work together, I think, quite well. So I think there's, at least to me, it projects a future for the town that is looking forward, and I think it's going to be very helpful. So it's not so much a question as a comment that I have spent time with it, and I think there's a lot of terrific work in there.
Thank you. I'm sure that for those that have been heavily involved, they appreciate that. So I am now going to turn to our public. Again, for those interested in providing comments and questions, now is the time to do so. I'll call each hand raised one at a time. For staff, if there's an opportunity, what I think I'm going to do, because it is 5:40, we'll go through the comments, and then if we'll take a break. And if there are any clusters of questions that you can answer after the break, please do so. And then again, if there are those that require further analysis or information that will be brought to the commission hearings, that would be great to identify as well. And so with that being said, I will call our first speaker, Lisa, and then our order of the first three will be Lisa Wade, Lee Quintana, and then Lulu Sterling. So Lisa.
Hi, my name is Lisa Wade, and I'm with Plant-Based Advocates of Los Gatos. I've lived in the town of Los Gatos for over 30 years. I want to thank the GPAC, the Town Council, and Ms. Armour for their very hard work on this. We did want to mention that we want to add a plant-based education program to the environmental and sustainability element, section 8. I know you said that you don't like to have detailed plans, but really we're just asking for an implementation program to be added to section 8.12. You have an ecosystem protection program, you have a landscape maintenance education program, and we just like you to add a plant-based education program, just those 4 words, plus 1 or 2 sentences to describe it, just like you have for the ecosystem protection and the landscape maintenance protection. So in section 8.12, you have implementation programs A through M. So we're asking you to add the letter N and add plant-based education program as an additional implementation program. So it's not going to be very detailed. It would fit exactly into the general plans, general ideas and big plan thinking. We did submit a more detailed plan if you wanted to see what that could look like based on a plan in Mountain View. But like I said, we really would just like to see you add an implementation program N to the environmental and sustainability element, which is 8.12. We have widespread community support for this in Los Gatos. Residents are enthusiastic about learning the whys and hows of plant-based eating. So far, we have the support of 218 residents of Los Gatos. We also have the support of 32 close neighbors in Monte Sereno, et cetera, who spend time in Los Gatos. We also have the support of some prominent leaders from nearby areas, such as Lucas Ramirez, the vice mayor of the city of Mountain View, and Allison Hicks, city council member in Mountain View. In addition, we have environmental organizations and health NGOs who are in strong support of our proposals. We are very proud that the Center for Biological Diversity has included written testimony in support of our efforts. And you also heard tonight that the Sierra Club Loma Prieta chapter supports a plant-based education plan. I've attached our petition signatures for your review. We continue to receive support, and more people have signed on since I submitted the list on Friday. It's really important to us that you consider this because according to the United Nations, if meat consumption continues on its current trajectory, we cannot limit global warming to 2 degrees Celsius, the level necessary to avoid the potential collapse of human society. So we thank you so much for taking this into consideration.
Thank you, Ms. Wade. Vice Mayor, I see your hand up. So do you have a question of the speaker?
Yes, please.
Okay, and Ms. Wade, if you could hold on. Go ahead.
Yeah, so my question was, I was looking for this earlier because of all of the comments that came in by email. In the section 6.13 under healthy community, we have PFS 26.3 that says healthy diet options. This is on 6-33 of the general plan. Here it says support programs that guide healthier diet options within the community. So is this the question is this good enough because it supports all good diet options instead of just being specific about a plant-based diet?
So yeah, we would love to see plant-based diets specifically called out for both the health and environmental benefits. We'd love to see it in the health section and also in the environmental sustainability section. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And if you could hold on, Commissioner Suzuki.
I was wondering if this wording would suffice for you. I'm just throwing out an option, which is for PFS 26.3. Would this wording work? Healthier diet options, supporting programs that guide healthier diet options within the community, including plant-based options. So in this case, we would explicitly say plant-based options.
Yes, we would definitely support that. But again, we'd like to see a dedicated program to plant-based eating, just like you have a dedicated program for ecosystem protection and landscape maintenance education. We think there's enough interest in the community, and we know that this issue is important enough to really have its own, implementation program.
And Ms. Armour?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I wanted to step in on this question. The printed copies of the draft general plan that were distributed did come with an errata sheet where we made one correction. If you take a look at this policy, we're talking about PFS 26.3 in the online version, you'll see that the policy does actually include support programs that guide healthier diet and plant-based eating options within the community. So the advocates for this have seen that and are aware of that, and they're looking to also have an implementation program, is my understanding. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions of Ms. Wade? Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Wade. Our next speaker is Ms. Quintana, followed by Lulu Sterling.
Mayor, I'll have to go ahead and promote Ms. Quintana to panelist.
Okay.
So can I?
Yes, please join us. Thank you.
Okay. I had planned to submit detailed comments. Unfortunately, I am in the middle of a very bad period of, forget the term, writer's block. So I'm going to be just very general, but I also need to clarify my vote at the last general GPAC meeting. I voted yes, but my yes was very qualified to simply pass it on to Planning Commission and Council, since GPAC was really not being given a choice. And I was not recommending approval of the draft general plan as it is. I would like to see the town seriously consider taking a pause and coordinating the general plan, the housing element, and the objective study that is being done, so that all can be meshed together in one cohesive, coherent process. I'm particularly disturbed by the fact that I think while general plans should be general, this general plan is so general that I have no idea what it would mean in the implementation stage, since we had no information about how these new policies would change any of our documents or the zoning code. In addition, we use the terms should and shall. We've defined what is mandatory in the plan and what is a less than mandatory, but they're defined by only 3 words each, yet the actual general plan policies use about 40 plus or minus words, so that it is not clear direction. And that's the other thing that I am particularly concerned about, is the fact that the direction is not specific. It's very general. And as we know, when projects come to actual approval, the planning department looks at the zoning code more than it does at guidelines. And if the guidelines don't say shall, usually that information is not incorporated into the design. I have a whole list of things, but I will try to get them in writing so that you have them before you when you meet as deciding body. One of the things, I'll mention one last thing because I think it's important. I agree that the plan is very complex and too lengthy, and I think it's poorly organized. I think we need a better.
Ms. Quintana, your 3 minutes is up, but I do see a hand raised already. So Councilmember Hudis.
Thank you, Ms. Quintana. I'm sorry we weren't able to connect earlier, and hopefully I can understand some of the concerns that you've raised. I wanted to follow up on the idea that you presented first, which was to look at the housing element and the general plan at the same time. And, I'm not used to that because in the last cycle, I came on at the end of the general plan and the beginning of the housing element, and there was a clean handoff there. But maybe you're aware, maybe staff is aware, is this done elsewhere where communities facing the time crunch and getting their arena numbers and all that decide to do both of those, to revise the land use and the housing element kind of simultaneously?
I'm not sure I can speak to that specifically. I can speak to at least one general plan that I'm aware of from the city of Santa Clara, where they divided their general plan into phases. And the first phase, the end of the first phase was when they went back and looked at their housing element. And before they did their housing element, there were a series of different things that needed to be done before they could proceed into the next phase. So they did phase their development. My thought was that it's not that far away. It would be much, to me, by approving the general plan with specifics in it on the land use, in a sense, we're constraining the committee or the advisory board that it's going to advise on the housing element to match what is in the general plan. I think that's putting a little bit of putting the cart before the horse, and the best is to develop the two in sync with one another so one doesn't have to go back and change the general plan if the state, which I think is highly likely, will not consider the housing element based on our general plan to be adequate. I also think that we need to look at focusing the areas that we choose for growth and not doing it in a broad brush. Identify the areas, but then prioritize them. I'd like to add one more thing. The General Plan Committee, my understanding was that our understanding was when we were adding housing units from office and other commercial designations, that would decrease the number of increases in density allowed through the rest of the residential designations. I could go on forever, so I'll stop.
No, thank you. And your comment about objective language and standards is something I want to explore maybe later in the meeting. Thanks.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Lulu Sterling, followed by FL.
Hi, this is Felix Sterling. I'm Lulu's husband. We share the same account. We're longtime residents of Los Gatos and also parents involved in the schools here and in a local employer as well. So I think we're actually pretty engaged with the community here and have a pretty strong feel for what a lot of the residents feel about this density issue. So I'm kind of surprised to hear that there would be such a diversity of opinion. I think there actually isn't such a wide diversity of opinion. We've been on a number of these calls now about different topics, and we've noticed an apparent diversity that comes from the involvement of a lot of folks with different opinions about which direction the town should go in, frequently non-residents who are activists. So from their point of view, they feel like they're pushing things in the right direction. But of course, the purpose of the council and the plan is to improve the town for the benefit of the residents of the town and the community. So, for example, last time we were talking about crime, I had 3 activists in a row during the public comments period telling us crime is going down. I think most people in the town have a different impression of what's going on. So getting back to this issue, we live in a 130-year-old Victorian. I work in San Jose. We decided to live several towns over from where I work and do the commute because we were looking for a single family home in a relatively low density community with the historical character of Los Gatos. But now our house is zoned orange and our neighbors' houses are zoned orange and we're on 1-acre lots. So our neighbor could put in 14 units next to our historical 130-year-old home. Were they to do that, I think we'd leave. And I think if we did, a developer would probably do the same thing to our house. And that would change the character quite a bit. And it wouldn't look like Almond Grove. It wouldn't look like downtown Los Gatos. And I'm not sure who would benefit from that. certainly not the current community, the shops, the people who are benefiting from Los Gatos now and who moved here for its character. So again, I think, from reading the plan and who it's intended to benefit with this missing middle housing and so on, it doesn't seem like it's the people who live here now. Certainly, we have a very strong basis to object, like most of the other communities did, to this kind of density, right? If I think of before now, what were the main pressures that made life hard for us here? Well, one of them is that our fire insurance rate got doubled 2 years ago, and then it got canceled this year because we're in a high fire risk zone. We managed to find alternative fire insurance. It'll probably get canceled next year, and then we'll be on to California Fair Plan. We've had to cut 25 trees and clear all kinds of defensible space around our house. And now we're potentially looking at many more units packed in, coming down the one road we have for escape from our community. Doesn't make any sense, particularly when every summer the traffic is atrocious getting out of our neighborhood. I have to ride my bike around town instead of drive, and now we're going to increase it further. It just doesn't make any sense. So we really think this needs to go to a vote. It should not be decided at a council level. It's too important. We need a vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sterling. Our next speaker is FL's, followed by Rob Moore.
Hello.
Yes, welcome.
Thank you. My name is Fei Li, and I have only been the Los Gatos resident for last few years. And first of all, I have to admit that I have not read the general plan carefully. I just got alerted to this discussion through a neighborhood group, and I joined the meeting kind of cold-feet. So I only have two general questions. I think some of the questions that Councilman Hudis already touched upon, but I really want to drill this down. So first one, why don't we benchmark against other communities? I heard Councilman Hudis mention that the other community already reject the minimum refund numbers, and now we're doubling what the refund is calling for. So what's so special about Los Gatos? And secondly, about the timing of this plan. Why do we plan for 20 years? Does Los Gatos have a especially clear crystal ball that we can foresee 20 years? Why the other towns have trouble seeing 4 years or 8 years? So those are my two basic kind of high-level questions, but I promise that I will really read those general plans. I'm sure I have more questions to follow. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Rob Moore, followed by Deborah Parsons.
Good evening, Mayor, Town Council, and Commissioners. My name is Rob Moore, and I'm a lifelong resident of Los Gatos. I've been doing a lot of thinking lately about some of the fissures that exist in our town and how we, as active citizens and leaders in our community, can work to mend them. I'm here to speak tonight because I believe that this general plan is one of the most effective ways to do that. And while it's not perfect, I feel that this general plan attempts to acknowledge and address our troubled history as a town and as a country. And I'm excited to see what this plan does for the people of Los Gatos. Most people in Los Gatos and around the country, I really do think recognize racism and discrimination. We can see when someone makes a racially targeted remark or makes an offensive joke. And I think most of us recognize too that many service workers in our town tend to be people of color, while residents of our town tend to be white. There's clear racial disparities in wealth and privilege among a myriad of other things. And I hope that most of us can acknowledge here. I think where divergence arises is and where recent conversations in this town come to points of disagreement is in what causes these disparities and what we should do about them. Some folks see racism as an individual's issue, meaning there are people who are racist and that's wrong, but if those people stopped being racist, everything would essentially sort itself out. Once we get these individual bad actors to quit their racist ways and step down from positions of power, we've done it, racism solved. Unfortunately, the problem is not that simple. I think a better way to look at this is as a systems issue, that fundamental pernicious barriers were placed in the past and still exist today. Barriers that hindered the success, prosperity, and humanity of the people in our community in ways that hard work and determination often are simply unable to overcome. These tangible systematic barriers have impacted our community include GI Bill housing provisions that were not given to Black service members after World War II, which caused Black home ownership in the United States today to be 27% lower than white home ownership, and deeds to houses, including clauses that ensured certain homes could never be sold to Jews or Black folks. There are titles that are written that belong to houses in our community in Los Gatos that still have these clauses written in them. You could go look at them. That's what systematic racism is, and I think that we as a town have an obligation to address and rectify this troubling past. I'm proud to say that I think we're moving in that direction. The 2040 General Plan includes important provisions when it comes to land use, mobility, and especially our new racial, social, and environmental justice element that I think will make a really meaningful, positive, and lasting impact on our town, how it looks and feels. I'm excited to see our town moving in this direction of progress, and I think the 2040 General Plan is the best way to continue along that path. Thank you all for engaging in the hard work required to make our town a place that we can all be proud to call home. And despite all of the things that exist in our community right now, I remain optimistic about our trajectory as a town. Thank you all.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Deborah Parsons, followed by LVM Parent.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, welcome.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Debbie Parsons. I'm a resident of Los Gatos and have lived here for over 30 years. I'm here to join in the call for the inclusion and funding of a program to educate residents on the climate benefits of a plant-based diet. A major new study published in Nature Food was reported on widely last week, including in publications like The Guardian, New York Times, and others. This study shows that the production of animal products worldwide causes twice the pollution of plant-based foods. This research confirms previous findings on the outsized impact that animal product production has on the planet. Atul Jain, climate scientist at the University of Illinois and co-author of the paper published in Nature Food, said policymakers may want to use the results of these studies to think about how to control greenhouse gas emissions. Authors of Grazed and Confused, a study out of Oxford University, recommended that instead of trying to find more so-called responsible sources of animal products, consumers should focus on reducing their consumption of animal products altogether. We ask that the town take these important new studies into consideration when making sustainability recommendations for the 2040 General Plan. We ask that you include and adequately fund a program to educate residents on the environmental impact of their food choices. We would like the town to fund speaker series, cooking classes, documentary screenings, veg fests, and other events to provide people with the support they need to reduce consumption of animal products. According to the book Project Drawdown, a plant-based diet is the most effective action an individual can take to help the planet. It is something easy that you can do every day. We look forward to the town of Los Gatos being part of a cost-effective solution that offers a brighter future for our town. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is LVM Parent, followed by DMAC.
Hello, can you hear me?
You do have a bit of an echo, so you want to try that again?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. I am a Los Gatos resident and also a mother to two school-age kids. So I want to make the general comment, to the general plan from the perspective of someone who actually live here and drive around town day to day. I want to first talk about the traffic issue. I think for people who are familiar with downtown Los Gatos, knowing during the morning rush hour and afternoon pickup time, Los Gatos High School, Van Meter Elementary School, and Fisher Middle School, the traffic is really bad. My house is only a mile and a half from the school, but it can take up to 30 minutes to get to school. So I cannot imagine what that's gonna be like when the neighborhood around Los Gatos Los Gatos Boulevard gonna be designated as medium density housing, which means 14 to 24 units per acre in this plan. If that happen, what are we gonna do? I heard there is environmental impact report being issued. So I would like to ask, what's the decision? What's the conclusion from that report? Did you conclude that we can actually handle that? Because from my perspective, I just don't see how that happened. Secondly, fire safety. We live pretty close to downtown, even though we're down the hill, not on the hillside, we're still designated as extreme high fire hazard zone. And our house is also designated as medium density housing per the general plan. So I would like to ask if all the choke point and the neighborhood around that is all medium housing, imagine when there's a fire evacuation, what's gonna happen to the people who live on the top? Has that been considered? And also, next point I want to make is, I personally find this extremely unclear. What's the feedback process on this general plan? I heard at the beginning, someone had mentioned there has been 35 meetings to discuss this plan. However, I only became aware of this plan in the past few weeks. And I think it's the same thing, sentiment probably shared with many residents here, because for many people that I talk to, it all seems to be pretty shocking what's gonna happen in this plan. So I really think there needs to be more community hearings and more outreach to the local residents, because this really impact their daily life. I think earlier there was a mention of there's 337 comments being raised online, but when you actually make a comment, they didn't even ask you if you're a resident. And I think compared to a population of over 30,000 people in town, that 300 comment is not allowed. I wouldn't call it a robust outreaching.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is DMAC, followed by Jack.
Hi, Mayor, council members. Thank you. My name is Barbara. I'm also a parent here in town with 2 children. First, I wanted to circle back to Council Member Hudez's question in the beginning of how many people in the town actually know about this 4-year plan. And I don't talk to everybody in the town, but I can say when I mention it to my friends who are also busy with kids, nobody's heard of it. So I'm asking if we can do a little better job of getting the word out to people in town, informing them about feedback sessions. I know flyers are expensive, but that might be a suggestion, is just to mail everyone a flyer, letting people know what's going on and how they can participate, because I do think it would be nice to have more of the town participating in these very major decisions. I was surprised by a couple things tonight. The first one is very high level, just like the plan. Seeing the vision statement, I was surprised to see that a goal is to keep our small town character. With almost 4,000 new housing units going in, that seems to fly in the face of keeping our small town character. So that was just a surprising vision, part of the vision statement to see. Just like the previous speaker, she had asked about the results of the environmental impact report. I'm going to look online for that, but I would assume that we're going to increase our police and our fire at the same proportion that we're going to increase our population. So I'll go and check for that, but I'm hoping that that's a logical conclusion, because I think that safety is going to be one of the #1 issues with this plan. I also came with the question tonight of not understanding why we didn't just go with the required minimum. Why are we doubling it? And I was surprised to find out that that's also a council level decision, which strikes me as odd. I just think it would be great if we could take this to some sort of a vote, just get more people in town involved, and see, what people in town want, because it's our town and we love it and we want to be part of the decision-making process. Thank you all.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Jack, followed by Susan Burnett.
Hi, my name is Jack Vaneda. I'm a 50-year resident of Los Gatos. And I happen to head up Los Gatos Community Alliance. At 8:46 this morning, we sent a 2.5-page comment on this meeting for the PC and the council to consider. It went to 5 council members, went to the town manager, and to Joel Paulson. Unfortunately, the letter never made it to the packet. Now, this is not the first time this has happened to us. We send in some comments, and I realize that the comments are not necessarily always positive to the council or the staff's position, but you do get a little bit suspicious when your letters don't show up. That's all I have to say. Thanks.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Susan Burnett, followed by Lonnie Haar.
Good afternoon. It's been my name is Susan Burnett. It's really a fun thing actually on Zoom because you can have a cup of coffee and you don't have to wear your mask, which is terrific. So anyway, in 1992, by the way, I made copies. I went to Kinko's. I have the general plan. I have the hillside development. I made copies of the latest residential guidelines and the previous housing element chapters. Quite a group here, but I wanted to get myself up to speed. In 1992, we put in the pre-1941 guidelines, and now at that time that was a 50-year guideline. So now it's almost 30 years, and I think because I'm speaking about the housing element board, which of course is in our general plan, and also of course is in the element, the housing element booklet. And in that housing element, of course, the guidelines are addressed as pre-1941. So because I almost got the Glen Ridge district a historic district, and I know you've heard this before from me, after working 2.5 years and getting it all compiled in the ordinance, it didn't go through. But anyway, when I look at all my photographs, which I did 12 blocks of, there's quite a few houses that were built after 1941 that are really remarkable. And they still should be honored and protected in a certain way. So I would wonder if we could, instead of pre-1941 guidelines, if we could up it a bit to maybe pre-1961 guidelines. What I'm trying to do is be more protective. Not that I want to exclude building and modernization, but maintain our neighborhood feel. And if it so happens that the lot that's empty across the street has to have a duplex put in, it would go along with the general neighborhood and work with it. So that's my desire. I don't know where I would go to ask if we can maybe upgrade from pre-1941 to like it should be, it's almost 30 years since that time. So, because they did it in a 50-year block. So I'm just saying, I think we should, increase the guidelines, basically. Anyway, that's my story.
Thanks, Ms. Burnett.
Thank you for listening.
Of course. And you have a question from Councilmember Gatos?
Okay.
Thank you for pointing out that I actually, when I was chair of the Historic Preservation Committee, that was one of the ideas that was discussed, and I don't know, it might have been moved forward to the GPAC or not. That's to, continually or to at least one time update that 1941 to be more inclusive. One of the other ideas, which I believe did make it in, was to look at the historic resources inventory again.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that it's dated and the photographs are in black and white and they're very hard to read. Do you think that would be valuable? Do you think that should be part of the implementation plan?
I do. And like I say, I have photographs of all the houses in the Glen Ridge district that might qualify for this a new guideline. And when I was on the Historic Preservation Committee right after the Loma Prieta earthquake, of course, that was always our intention. And the town council and the commissions were terrific because they really protected our town. And like I feel now, right now, we're at another, I'm gonna cry, we're at another serious crossroads. And we have to do what our town council and commissions and committees did at that time and protected our homes, our neighborhoods. And that's why I'm hoping that our town council and our Historic Preservation Committee and our Planning Commission will again step up to the plate and do whatever we can to, I didn't mean to go on and on, but yes, when I was on the Historic Preservation Committee, it was always the intention to be, increasing the guideline number.
Right.
So.
Thank you. That was a very important thing that the town did some time ago, and it saved entire neighborhoods from.
Absolutely, because at that time there were oh, sorry.
I'm sorry. I'm just trying to figure out if there's more questions or.
Oh, okay. No, but at that time there were a lot of developers and people wanting to tear down homes and build big structures. And I think we're seeing, if this goes through, this SB 9, we're going to see the same kind of thing. Although I think there are.
Burnett, I do have to cut you off now.
Okay, that's okay. Thank you. Thank you, Joel, too.
Our next speaker is Lonnie Har, followed by Ying.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, welcome.
Hi there. My name is Lainey Har, and I first want to thank Councilman Hudas for his email alerting me to this meeting. Like Barbara, I also did not know about this meeting or the plan, so I did appreciate the heads up. I've lived in Los Gatos since 2009, and my family and I absolutely love this town, except for on Saturdays during the summer when we become prisoners in our own home. And on those days, we pray that nobody in our family or our neighborhood gets ill or requires an emergency vehicle to navigate the gridlock to get to us, because it just gets horrendous. So that brings me to the plan. I've been doing my homework, but this thing is a beast. It's 270 pages. And but from what I was able to glean, to me, it seems that the safety element and the housing element are totally at odds. The plan shows an additional 3,738 housing units to be added to Los Gatos. That would be an additional 8,971 residents. If half of those people have vehicles, that would mean an additional 44,000 or 4,400 cars on our roads. So for those of you that have kids, and some people have already talked about this, can you only imagine what that's going to mean for our insane school traffic during pickup and drop off? It's a huge inconvenience for all of us right now. With an additional 4,400 cars, it would be insane, but it wouldn't kill us, right? What will kill us if this happens is a wildfire. There's no way that we today would be able to evacuate everybody safely, but with an additional 4,400 cars on the road, it's a death sentence. It really is. I don't know if you guys have seen the documentary on Netflix about Paradise. If you haven't, please go and see it. It could happen to our town. And I think that if we do something like this, I feel like it's a really poorly thought out housing policy. It's undoubtedly going to threaten the lives and the properties of our residents here. And it's not acceptable. I think that this town is amazing. This has nothing to do with not wanting to be inclusive. It has everything to do with the safety of our existing residents, and to approve a plan like this to me is unconscionable. So I do implore all of you to reject this. And I do have a question. I guess I'm just going to throw it out there. I really don't understand why Los Gatos blindly accepted this new housing mandate, and it actually didn't even just accept it, they increased it almost by double. When 27 neighboring jurisdictions are appealing it. Montecito, Palo Alto, Saratoga, and even Los Altos Hills is appealed based on their wildfire threat. People here in Los Gatos are having their insurance canceled because we are in a high risk area, which our safety element in the plan talks about. Yet you guys are looking at adding this additional, almost 4,000 housing units. It makes no sense to me. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Ying, followed by Lee Fago.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello. Hi, thank you everyone. Thank you all the council members. So I'm a resident of Los Gatos since 2014. I'm new here. I'm new to the country as well. I actually come to America after I graduated from my university in China. So I want to dive in this meeting. I just want to address, like, if you want to think about the inclusive, I actually love Los Gatos because I feel even as a foreigner, I was so welcomed in this small town. And this give me a sense of small town sense and give me a family welcome feeling in this small town. So I don't really think everyone lived in Los Gatos or was like systematically racist or something like that. We are already welcome small town. So being that, I'm saying for this general plan, I try to do my homework, but with so many pages, I didn't finish the general plan. But one impression I had is no matter what plan we have, we should represent our residents first, right? I think that's something we should be thinking in the first place. I'm not meaning to say we do not welcome our teachers, our policemen live here. We welcome them live here, but we can have other alternatives. It's not like by destroying the current atmosphere of this beautiful small town. And we already see all the problems as all the people's already mentioned, wildfire, traffic, all these things. So I have two specific questions for how we come to this space. I actually got alert by our neighbors to say, hey, we have this meeting going on and it's already come to end. They're already going to pass that. My first question is, how this kind of plan, 20-year plan, so relevant to every resident is not called to our attention? As I just mentioned, I did never receive any flyer. I did never receive any like poster, anything to remind us this huge plan is coming. So first thing I want to ask, what's justify this approach to the residents? Why this become only council member discussion, not to the residents discussion? That's first question. Second question, I guess I have the same question as other people asks. Why we double the state minimum requirement, while even other very similar peer cities or counties are actually appealing the minimum? What makes us to do that? I hate to say that, but I'm afraid most of maybe our councilling members here is not representing the residents here. Maybe there is other interest or influence this general plan for Los Gatos member. I'm just throwing this question out. I apologize if I said something inappropriate, but really I was thinking, if this council member is really represents all the residents of Los Gatos, why this is not being reached out earlier until this stage? Thank you.
Thank you. And as I mentioned earlier, we'll have staff respond to individual comments as a collective whole. Our next speaker is Li Fago, followed by Yan Yi He.
Good evening, council members and planning commission members. Really appreciate the work that you've put into this effort, as well as the support and the work from the town staff. A couple of comments. The first one is, I agree with all the points made by both Ms. Lee Quintana and Ms. Lonnie Harris. They were excellent and specific to the points that I wanted to raise as well. And if we follow some of the logic of taking the housing element and looking at the numbers that are now being projected for the town of Los Gatos growth over the next 20 years, do we want to have the same thing with the same kind of growth rate, 1/3 of the population of the state of California, 1/3 of the population of the county of Santa Clara to increase? That's crazy. That's nuts. And to the questions of infrastructure, traffic, vehicle miles traveled, all of that, these are things that are going to impact us forever if we don't take the correct decision making now and reduce these numbers. I cannot find the logic of doubling the RENA numbers that were put in place and had been approved previously by the council in an earlier draft. So please reconsider this. And another point is it possible, because we're doing the housing elements in these 8-year cycles, and we're looking at a 20-year plan, is it possible to amend or the draft of the general plan to allow for iterations of the housing element to then be brought into the general plan, so that we're looking at all of the goals that we want with the general plan and all of the guidance that helps us to achieve it. But specifically for the housing, the location of where and how many housing units, it would be part of an 8-year review within that 20-year plan. I think that would make some sense. There'd be some logic to an efficiency by doing that. The second thing is that, or another point is, that was made by Melanie and Matthew Huda said that why did we take the additional units in the office area, the office properties, to put housing in? I think that's a good solution on trying to achieve the goal, but to instead, what was done is to see that area as additional housing rather than a way to incorporate the goal into that area of the office properties. That is something that I think was misuse of that resource. So please reconsider how we're going forward with the general plan and how we're going to incorporate the housing element to have reasonable target numbers, the right kind of intensity as well as density, and to review it and get community input on an 8-year cycle. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fago. Our next speaker is Yan Yi, followed by Vivian Tam.
Hello, this is Yan Yi. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Welcome.
Yeah, hi, everyone. Good evening. I moved to the town about half years ago with my family. I have a little boy, and we both work in Mountain View area. We never thought of moving here until the working from home policy for almost 2 years. And so I know that how the traffic works day to day for on 17 and 85. So I wonder if there is any plans or planning or decisions about the commutes if we expand like 4,000 more units, and probably every unit we take more than one person commuting to work. And well, how about other plannings to accommodate so many people, like any plaza or an other restaurant and the public safety, etc. I think we probably need a more careful planning with those. It's not just build a house, people live there. People need to go out of the house. And I have, and another thing is about reach out or penetration of this news. I just know it's a few days ago, and I've been working from home, never miss any mails, but I don't receive any flyer or emails. So I think so probably there are other ways more efficiently to work instead of have some booth in the farm market, etc., to hand out the flyers, because we are in like a 21st century. So probably like we can send a flyer, we can find the address of all households and sending flyers. And if you think the budget is a problem, probably I think many residents are willing to donate somehow to have everyone involved, the discussion as early as possible. And also like MLS also have the email address of the contract, of the transactions of the household, etc. So you can have their contact information. And as a nonprofit organization, it's also possible to reach out to them maybe in a less cost, in a more economical way or in a more efficient way. So more people can be involved. And then we can see there are lots of sharper questions, and many questions are not answered at all, even with such low penetration rate. So I wonder whether there are any public websites that everyone can leave message in, not only like some counselor will reply to individuals, but we don't know what question has been asked, what kind of question should be upvotes, etc., to raise more attention. And we would like to know what's the answers as well, instead of like always need to spend so much time at certain time in the meeting. And 4 p.m. actually is it's a time for people to have meetings in the company on Monday. So it's harder for everyone to get involved live. So I wonder maybe there are other ways to increase the people's engagement on this discussion. And I'm really curious how the decision gonna be.
I do need to cut you off now, but again, we'll have staff answer those questions at the end of all public comments. Thank you. Our next speaker is Vivian Tam.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, hi. My name is Vivian and I'm a Los Gatos resident. The scale of proposed new development in the town concerns me. Why is our town almost doubling its new residential developments above the arena numbers? Same as a lot of other speakers, they already spoke. They asked the same questions. We were all shocked when we heard about other towns like Saratoga, Palo Alto. They're all outright rejecting the state requirement. Why is our town need to doubling the number? And I noticed our 2040 plan has a goal of bringing in a younger generation and more diversity by offering a more affordable housing. However, I don't think the 2040 plan will be successful by only offering the predominantly residential units alone. As an Asian woman with a young family, I moved to Los Gatos at the end of last year. While we were looking for housing in the South Bay area, we looked in a lot of areas like Cupertino, Los Altos, and Saratoga, and we noticed actually Los Gatos is more affordable than the areas I mentioned. The reason for that is because Los Gatos is missing job opportunities. All the large IT companies except Netflix are near Cupertino, Mountain View, and Sandville. And that's where the young and more diverse families are moving to. And the reason we chose to live in Los Gatos is because of the beautiful historical town center and less crowded community. And the 2040 plan would jeopardize the elements of the town character that drew us here. And if Los Gatos does not plan on having a more large companies moving into the area, the 3,900 additional units would be less attractive to younger and more diverse families. I'm afraid we'll end up in a situation our housing supply increases far more than the demand. And Los Gatos is a beautiful and unique town. I don't think that urbanized development in Los Gatos will be successful like it might be in a place like San Jose. San Jose is developing denser residential area, which makes more sense over there because of all the big IT companies moving into the area, and they have the infrastructure over there. They have all the VTA, the BART, Caltrain, and which in Los Gatos, we don't have that. So with the Los Gatos 2040 plan, only trying to increase the density of residential buildings without adding more jobs, the town would not become an attractive place for younger and more diverse families to live in. And I would like to suggest the town managers to please reconsider this plan and look at other towns who rejected the plan and go through a voting process with Los Gatos residents. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Ellen Lee, followed by Janice Carter.
Hello?
Yes, Ms. Lee, welcome.
Oh yeah, hi. And just got caught up with some of the glitch, I think. Thank you so much for the council and this opportunity. Well, actually, is the interesting part is I just getting the email on Saturday regarding for this actually meeting, and I can join. And well, I don't have a lot of time to go through all the general plan, detailedly, but I actually did circle around a couple of the key points. And as I feel like, as a resident in this city, and I can understand that why the council is making this decision. You want to just double up with the, the residential and the density, and you want to improve the financial and for the future. But as the, current residents, is actually a lot of things happening behind the scene. But it seems like the city didn't, try to help or improve or solving the problem that we currently, facing up. And actually, I moving into Los Gatos since 2017, and I actually own the house down in South California. So I feel that right now there's two cities same type of the shaping future, and it's no more Los Gatos anymore. That's how I feel. If we're gonna change the spirit and the story about Los Gatos, it's gonna be totally different. So I actually don't have any concept at this time, because I even thinking about to becoming a small business owner in Los Gatos, since I want to invest more time and money and financial in this town. But it seems right now I don't see the future. Especially, thank you for the Matt, Mr. Hudis. You did mention that. Have anybody noticed about the move out from California? And even though we're talking about our families thinking about moving to Texas, it's because California's shaping is becoming a fact to all cities. These days, all cities actually been facing the same, problem right now. You have people moving out because of the quality of the living, because the expense, and because the pollution. So if we're gonna so care about the ecosystem for this climate change for the future, then why are we inviting more, density to this community and creating more pollution to this air? So then I don't see this from your general plan, even though I try, and it's costing me 1 hour to looking all this general plan generally, but I don't see any solutions here. All I can see is just a plan for financial, for budget, and for more cooperate with the state, agendas. That's what I'm saying. It's not beneficial for all the residents or the small business here. I just want everybody to consider again, if you want to keep Los Gatos, Los Gatos. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lee. Janice Carter. Ms. Carter, it looks like you have talking permission. So if you could just unmute yourself and you can begin.
Oh, there. Okay. I've lived in Los Gatos for 37 years, and I love Los Gatos. It's changed a lot. The only reason I knew about this meeting is a friend of mine shared an email that she got from Councilman Hudis, which I appreciate. I don't think that people know about all these plans. There needs to be more outreach. I don't think, as I talk to my friends and my neighbors, they're not in favor of increasing this density this much. We all want better housing, more affordable housing, but this just seems ridiculous. I mean, I live in a neighborhood already within a block has apartment buildings, duplexes, single family, commercial. It's a very diverse community where I am. But you know what? You can't get out of the neighborhood very easily. It takes forever to get onto Los Gatos Boulevard. It takes forever to navigate Lark Avenue. I don't think that we've got the resources to keep up with this, and I'd be interested to see the environmental report. I mean, we've got water problems, we've got traffic problems. I just don't see this as a good idea. And I really like the points that Councilman Hudis made. I'm done.
Thank you, Ms. Carter. And I have no other hands raised, but we'll give it a second to see if there's anyone else who would like to participate. I see Roy Moses. And again, for anyone else who would like to participate, please use the raise hand feature. Otherwise, Roy, you will be the last speaker.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Welcome.
Good evening. Your council members, mayor. Well, at least thank you for having a meeting so that the public could come and at least listen to what you have to say. I as well was not notified about this meeting until this morning on an email from another friend. And you know me, I've been to your meetings. I would just say that the community is being disserved I was in on part of the group that fought the what's our famous North 40. Please, citizens of Los Gatos, just go and look at the North 40. I know you've already seen it. If you ever came to the meetings and listened to this council, the commissioners, what they promised us, what we asked for, and what they promised us, and what they've delivered, that'll tell you just about what you can expect in the future for the development of this town. I'm a 50-year member here, or over 50 years in Los Gatos, raised our children here. It was a beautiful little community. You can't stop growth. I'm not against developers, but they can do things that are right for the community, right for the soul of the people of this town. I don't believe any of you. The whole city management should be removed and taken away. Voters, gather, talk. They know we don't have time to go to all these meetings and listen to all this stuff that's going on, what's being developed, and we're being dictated to by the state and the other communities as to what we should do in our town. It's terrifically horrendous. I pray to God, I just pray to God that you all come to your senses and listen to the human heart and listen to what has to be done and be done correctly. You're working hard. You're spending a lot of hours. Why don't you give the people what they want, what they believe in, what they know? I'm a parent. We're all teachers. I had to teach my children what was right, to be honest, tell the truth, and deliver to them. I ask the same of the council. Listen to the community. 90% of the comments today are negative towards you and what you're trying to do. Reconsider. And I pray to God, I pray for you and for your guidance and whatever, but please listen to the citizens of this community. You've got a tough job ahead of you, especially when you're being dictated to by the state. But so I have to say this, I held back till the end because I didn't want to talk tonight because of my emotions and how I feel about what's going on. So I'm just saying, citizens, if you're on this meeting and you're not talking, unite and come to the meetings. And who's ever out there and you know a meeting that's coming up, get together, join together, and let's make the right decisions. And hopefully our leaders will listen to us and do what is right. God bless you all and good evening.
Thank you. And we do have several more speakers. The next is Debbie, followed by James Lyon.
Hi, my name is Debbie C. And I'm looking at section 2.2. There's a graph about the percentage of population. And it says that it has 71.7% of Los Gatos being white, whereas in Santa Clara, that number is 32. And in California, that number is 37.5. So, you know, I'm looking at the percentage of diversity in California versus the amount of diversity in Los Gatos. And I just wanted to say that I'm appreciative of the town wanting to be more inclusive of other cultures and other races and providing more opportunities for the lower, the affordable housing. And I would love for the council to maybe elaborate a little bit more about how you are addressing the increase in traffic through infrastructure, because I'm going to assume that we have, 270 pages worth of a general plan. You have thought about it. So I would love to give you the rest of my time to address that to the neighbors who are concerned about the increase in population in our town. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is James Lyon, followed by Suzanne.
Good evening or good afternoon. Thank you very much. I think
many comments have been said, but I do have concerns with this general plan. First is a 20-year time horizon is way too long to consider given the uncertainty. Secondly is on your housing element and the land use element. I mean, why is the town taking on so much of the burden of the state? This is a already fully developed town. Anything we're doing is infill. We're not adequately addressing traffic, parking, and safety issues. We already have the state mandated ADU law that many ADUs can go in without any on-site parking. That's just more cars on the street. And so, in fact, the ADU law creates unintended consequences because it is ministerial, where people are adding junior ADUs and ADUs into their property to just make houses bigger and more expensive and not actually creating true housing units. They're ADUs on paper only. Additionally, how are we going to address the schools? 4,000 housing units. How many more children will go into our schools? The schools are already overcrowded and impacted. I mean, years ago, Berry School was sold off by the district and is now the JCC on Oka Road. Who's going to fund the expansion of schools? Is that going to be through developer fees? And there never seems to be a nexus when it comes to traffic. And so there's so many items that still need to be addressed within this plan. I think that as Commissioner Hudas or Town Council Member Hudas commented, reducing the time horizon to have a better short-term view versus 20 years where there's so many uncertainties. I think that this really needs to be reconsidered by the council and the Planning Commission. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Suzanne, followed by Rachel Black.
Hi, my name is Suzanne Daly. My family has lived in Los Gatos for over 100 years. My grandparents moved to Los Gatos in 1920. My grandfather taught at Los Gatos High School. My father was born in Los Gatos. I was born in Los Gatos. When my father was growing up in the 40s, he knew everybody in town. That's how small Los Gatos was. So think about from the, that's 80 years till now. Think how much the population has already grown. Why does it need to grow more? Los Gatos is not technically a town, but likes to call itself a town. So remain a town. We are not a city. San Jose is a city. It has the infrastructure for a higher density of population. Los Gatos is not set up for that. And I think this general plan is ruining the town. It's ruining the community. It's ruining the feel of the town. It's ruining what most people love about Los Gatos. And this really needs to be thought out. And I agree with so many things that other speakers had said about this should be a vote. The council should probably all be voted out. The general plan, like this population overgrowth, needs to be something decided by the community, not by the council members. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Rachel Black, followed by Ellen Lee.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
We can. Welcome.
Hi, Rachel Black, concerned mom of kids here in Los Gatos. We've been here for about 10 years now, I think going on 11. We moved here from San Francisco primarily for the smaller town vibe. And while I appreciate the need to bring diversity to smaller communities in California, I think this is being executed really questionably. The first that I heard about this meeting and the plan was actually today from a friend. I wouldn't have known otherwise. I think that part of the problem here is that people are busy, people are burnt out by COVID, and there just hasn't been enough communication from the town that this is actually happening. So that's part one of my concern. Part two is to echo Lainey Har, safety. Please do go watch that documentary about Paradise. It could absolutely happen here. They call these the asbestos hills, but they're not. That's been proven over and over in other communities. We've lost fire insurance. We live in a supposedly not, fire risky neighborhood within downtown Los Gatos, but I don't believe it for a second. And anyone who's lived through the traffic here knows that getting out of here, if we do have a catastrophic fire incident, is going to be a catastrophe without measure. That and living in Almond Grove and watching what happens when we are blocked in by beach traffic makes me very wary of our safety. If somebody has an emergency, somebody's injured, somebody has a heart attack, how is the EMS going to get to them if we have 4,000 more units or 8,000, 12,000 more residents for that matter on top of it? Water scarcity, none of that seems to have been addressed. And then finally, my other concern as a parent is right now we don't have enough resources, enough community resources. We don't have a recreational center with a pool. We don't have a skate park for the kids. We have very limited resources for the kids as it is now. Does this plan include anything related to that? And also, does this plan include anything related to the prior speaker? I can't recall his name. Schools, where are these kids going to go to school? We're already overcrowded. Los Gatos High School has way too many students as it is. It's a great school. It's wonderful. I'm proud to have my kids go there. Very overcrowded, very impacted. No way to expand what we already have. Where are the kids going to go to school? Where are they going to play? Where's the recreation center to support all of this? And again, most importantly, the fire and other safety concerns. Thanks.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Ellen Lee.
Mayor, Ellen Lee has already spoken.
Oh, okay. I apologize for that. And then do I have any other speakers who would like to speak before I close public testimony? And Ms. Lee, we do give one opportunity per speaker. And so I see no other hands raised. I'm going to close public testimony. Again, this is, I'm going to ask staff when they come back to share other opportunities for the public to participate. Quick, just show of hands. Do any of my commissioners or council members need a break before we? Okay, I see no hands raised. Let's see if we can power through this. And so there were some initial questions that were raised by those in the public, but I think what would be helpful for staff is just to, again, walk us through. We don't have set dates, but the process of participation for those that are concerned that this was just one meeting to make their comments heard.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I'd be happy to walk through what the next steps are. As we did mention, we are going to have a community meeting, another opportunity to share the information we shared tonight, as well as answer questions and from the public. That is going to be another Zoom meeting. It's going to be held on Wednesday, October 6th at 6 p.m. And the information as to how to connect to that Zoom meeting will be available on the losgatos2040.com website, which is where we do keep updated information about upcoming events for the general plan. The next steps after that community meeting then will be to bring the draft general plan along with the final environmental impact report to the Planning Commission for consideration. They will consider these documents, prepare a recommendation, which will then go to Town Council for consideration and adoption.
And Ms. Armour, I'm just capturing some of the questions. There were some common themes. One was the EIR review. One was the RENA number up again, that was raised again. And there was another comment that was that I thought was helpful was, is there a place where all of these questions and answers are housed so that those that are participating can go and review what has been asked, what has been answered, and follow along that discussion.
Thank you, Mayor. And I would say that going to the losgatos2040.com website is actually going to be a great place for everybody to, number one, see what the upcoming meetings are. Number two, take a look at the draft general plan itself, as well as the environmental impact report and all of those documents. They are also on that page is two tabs to the right side of the screen, one for comments and one for signing up to get email notifications. So that's a great way to participate, to stay in touch, to get notifications when future meetings have been scheduled. And then you did ask about the, bring up the question about the arena numbers. And I'll start by pointing the council and planning commissioners and the public to take a look at attachment 4 to our staff report this evening's meeting. This actually lays out what the RENA allocations are for all the communities within the Santa Clara County and the Bay Area. No, this is Santa Clara County's allocations. And so while we acknowledge that the 1,993 units is a significant increase in Los Gatos, if you do look at some of the other communities, you'll see that San Jose is taking the largest chunk at 62,200 units. And so that does give some context to where these numbers are coming from and how they are spread among the different communities, and an acknowledgement that some communities like San Jose will have more capacity for these housing units.
Thank you. And council members and commissioners, any other questions that you would like to ask of staff based on what you have heard? Vice Mayor.
I think the most obvious thing to make clear to people is the council has not had a chance to weigh in on this plan. This is not a council member plan. This is still coming out of, the process from the advisory committee. I heard a number of people saying, we need to elect new council members or whatever they were saying, right? I haven't had a chance to weigh in at all on it, right? We did have a couple council members on the GPAC, but this is not at all our plan yet. And it's a long ways to go before it gets to be, the council gets to even comment on it. Or at this point, we're just learning about it.
Thank you, Councilmember Hudis.
I just had one thing I wanted to follow up on, and that's the point that was raised by Ms. Quintana about objective standards. I know that, and just to add a little context to this, so under the new laws, when someone applies for a development and it falls into a by right category, that means that it's not going to come to the Planning Commission, it's not going to come to the council, it's going to be approved at the staff level if they can check off that it meets those standards. And so I know that work has been done. I worked with a number of planning commissioners to tighten up language in the general plan, should versus shall, et cetera. But there were bigger issues about objective standards that I think could be addressed. And I know even going back to the North 40, and I was there in the courtroom, that it came down to how well we had defined our objective standards, and we hadn't done a very good job of it. So I would hope that there are ongoing efforts to go beyond what's in the current general plan and address some things like architectural compatibility, things along the lines that capture things like hillside views and other things, and turn something that could be seen as subjective into something that can be measured. And so that I'd be interested to hear about where we are in that process and whether we think that we can go forward with a general plan at this point without doing that work. I worry that there will be applications that will fall through the cracks because our objective standards haven't really been bolstered.
Thank you. Councilmember Risto.
Thank you. I actually just wanted to ask about outreach because, with this process going on for about 3 years, I know that there's been outreach done on social media, on Nextdoor, in a variety of ways. First of all, to engage people in the website so they can follow when all the meetings are happening. And then as meetings came up, one of the questions I had for staff, because maybe I'm remembering wrong, was a mailing ever done throughout the community about the general plan that we're starting it? Because it seems like I can picture on my mail table something that came out at one point. And I know at any given time, no matter how often we contact the community in a variety of ways, there's always a wave of people that are just hearing about it. So, I am concerned about how we connect with people, but I thought we'd done a mailing at some point.
Thank you for the question. We did a postcard mailing a couple of years ago to encourage all residents to sign up for Notify Me, and we gave them the choices of the types of information that they could sign up for. It did result in more residents signing up for What's New, as well as some of our more project-specific items. So we did do that, and that was in anticipation of hopefully getting some interest for the general plan. We are looking into the possibility of another postcard notification for the upcoming community meeting. Ideally, we would love to have the dates for Planning Commission and Council, but it may be that this would be a more targeted mailing. So we are looking at that. We don't do as much 30,000, piecemeals as I know our community would like, because we have found that we get thousands and thousands of hits on our social media. So we know that it is being followed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Jenoff?
Yes, thank you. I would just like to express a little bit of a concern. That's a big concern, actually. We heard from a lot of very emotional residents today, bringing compelling reasons to not grow, have very low growth, let the residents vote. So going forward, what I would hope that staff could help guide is where the expectations are. We can't set false expectations or set false hope that the general plan is going to go to zero housing growth. So what can staff do to help set what the lower or the minimum thresholds are, so people understand that we don't really have the ability to go to zero. So help us with what's flexible and what isn't flexible, not just in terms of, well, anything can be done, anything can be changed. That's possible in the realm of reality, but it's possibly impractical given time and budget constraints and what the state is asking us to do. So I think having some constraints around what we can move around and not. And the second thing, so that in particular regarding the housing numbers, and the second thing regarding a 10-year versus a 20-year plan, I think we've got to just nail that one down at some point and say, this is what we're going to do. We've got the updates, and just and put that stake in the ground and go forward, rather than. So if we can do that, if staff can help put those framework pieces together, so we know what kind of flexibility we have realistically, practically, I think it would be very, very helpful, particularly as we move into the Planning Commission meetings.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Suzuki?
I have two comments, which is one, specifically the number 3,700 housing units is pretty frightening, in large part because we don't actually know what those housing units, like what units it is comprised of. I believe that we should include slide 4H from the presentation directly into the general plan if we, just as a very quick amendment for people to get clarity as to where exactly a large number of these units come from. I mean, a large number of these units aren't even from this specific general plan. They are from existing or previously approved projects. Things like that to clarify the situation so that people are not looking at that black box giant unit would probably be just helpful for public information. Second is, I was wondering if we could include, because traffic, regardless of where you stand on housing issues or your stance on housing scarcity or how we should address that as a town, I think that everybody could agree across the board that traffic is terrible. Congestion is bad. It's bad for the environment. It's bad for the standards of living for the people living there. And I was wondering if we could include potentially a map just to clarify the situation, because again, when people hear we're going to build lots of units, even if they don't live in a congested area, or if they do live in a congested area, they don't know how exactly the developments are going to interact with where they live. So I was wondering if we could include perhaps a map or a heat map of the congested areas in Los Gatos and commit to specifically targeting means of traffic mitigation in those places.
Thank you, Commissioner. And Commissioner Hanson.
So I wanted to echo my fellow Commissioner Janet's comments about, I think it's important to understand where there's flexibility and where there isn't. And it's totally understandable that people are up in arms about large increases. But the fact is that we do have a RHNA target that is more than 3 times the one that we had in the last RHNA cycle. And so it is going to be a big number. And when we started the process of the General Plan Advisory Committee, we all felt that the best approach was to try and do this in a way that would address the needs of our residents and the residents that would like to live here, say, the adult children of people that have lived here, or seniors that want to move out of their big houses and don't have an opportunity to move into something that's not memory care or something in between. So when we started this whole process, we said the best thing that we can do is do everything we can do to try and encourage smaller units. And we can only go so far in the general plan because it's general. We have more opportunities to look at more details about that in the housing element as that proceeds. But going back to kind of what we can and we can't change, we already do know our RHNA target. And so even if there's an opportunity to adjust the numbers, and as also Commissioner Suzuki pointed out, 475 of the units that are in that big number that people are seeing are units that are in our current RHNA target, and we cannot count them towards the future. So no matter what we have, we still have a pretty big number in front of us. So we do need to take this thing by the reins and try and make it the best we can for our town going forward.
Thank you, Commissioner. And Councilmember Badami.
Thank you. So I would just like the general public to know and understand that we're obligated to plan for a certain amount of units, but it doesn't necessarily mean they get built. There can be hope on the horizon, whatever way you want to look at it, but I just wanted to clarify that statement.
Thank you, Councilmember. And I know Commissioner Barnett, I'll let you speak.
Yes, there was a large number of questions regarding the infrastructure, the police, the water, the schools, fire and evacuation. And it occurred to me that it might be helpful to extract from the draft EIR provisions that show that these issues are being considered in some way or manner, and make that something that can be communicated to the membership of the community.
Thank you, Commissioner. And I do want to echo, and perhaps I should have done a better job in reframing the conversation. I think council members and commissioners oftentimes are cognizant of the regional and state mandates that are happening. And we often get so involved in it, we forget that context isn't necessarily provided to our general public. And so I think what may be helpful for the community meeting that ensues is just a very brief explanation of the state mandates that are being asked of local municipalities to do their fair share of housing. I think the regional context of the numbers that Los Gatos has compared to our neighbors, I think would be helpful. And then just the reality, as Commissioner Janoff said, of what is within our purview that we can take proactive controls to design and what really is not. I think managing those expectations, there is no possible way we can submit a general plan with no growth. And so just making that absolutely clear so that there are no unexpected expectations for people that by participating in meetings asking for no growth, that is even an option. I think there is a frustration that we're hearing from our residents, and we appreciate that frustration, But I think what we're asking for is help us plan a document that provides some design to control the growth in a way that makes sense for Los Gatos, understanding the limitations that are in front of us. And so I just wanted to put that out there because oftentimes I know I just jump in without providing that regional context and realizing that I should have started the meeting with that context. Commissioner Thomas.
Thank you. I think as a member of the committee that helped come up with this general plan, I do really want to encourage residents to, I know that it is a hefty document, but read all of it, because taking the number of housing units that the town could be planning for out of context is really scary. And I do, understand that is a big number. But I think that I know that I have had many really great conversations in our meetings, and I've heard really great conversations amongst town council members that have really taken into account issues like traffic. We know, like, people in town know that that's a huge issue. And I think that this is a very holistic document, and it's trying to address all aspects, including infrastructure, schooling, or education, et cetera. So business growth and development. And so I just think that taking everything out of context can be kind of scary. So I think that really trying to come up with some solutions of what really are the main concerns, and are they really not being addressed in in the general plan or not? Because that is really where I think the best and most productive feedback can come from, is there stuff missing from some of the elements that will help us address these concerns?
Thank you. And then to staff, I know that there were several items that were what I call parking lot items that require further work on your part, especially as there's a better understanding of what SB 9 and SB 10. I will be in Sacramento with Town Attorney Schultz. I'm sure that will be a subject of conversation. But again, as more information is passed down to Sacramento, I encourage everyone, Los Gatos, actually, Ms. Armour, if you can, I don't want to mess it up. What is the proper website so that we, those that want to stay engaged and see the most recent information?
LosGatos2040.com.
Okay. And with that, are there any last comments or questions? Okay, well, I thank everyone that attended. I thank our council and commission for participating. This is one of several more meetings, and we encourage everyone, please share with your neighbors that there is this document, there is this process, and again, how best to provide feedback that helps us try to solve the challenges that are being presented to us. So thank you everyone for your time, and I wish you all a good night.